All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I'm so excited to share with you. We brought back James Tunney. This was James's eighth appearance on the podcast, I believe. And as you can tell by the timestamp, him and I had another marathon session. He has a new book out, AI-Govnerveance. It's a play on words, which he will get into. Gov, nerve, ince, the government hijacking nervous system, playing on the words, AI-Govnerveance, care and possession, and Dustopia. So we went over a lot of the themes of his new book and talking about the role of government and the automated systems that is really meant to hijack the perception, hijack the nervous system. And it's so deep and complex in how it does this. But James always has such a beautiful way of articulating and expressing these deepest truths. And as you guys will learn in this podcast, this agenda, it's deeply, deeply rooted. It goes back many, many years, hundreds, not thousands of years. And so we really unpack it and kind of show what's coming and what's at the forefront as we're very much at the precipice of a dawn of a new era. So I really appreciate James and his work that he's doing and the perspective that he's always sharing, and for taking the time to come on and talk for basically 4 hours about this. And I've gained a passion for it in the same sense that he does, because I think this topic is probably more important than any of the other ones that we talk about here on the Fifth Dimension. So I would encourage you guys to buy his new book. I just purchased a copy for myself, and I look forward to reading it. And the link to do so is in the episode show notes below, so definitely be sure to check it out. And if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on, whether that's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I definitely appreciate you guys supporting the show in that way. You can purchase a copy of my new book, The Final Judgement, Poems to Remember Who You Are, just a poetry collection, really looking at personal reckoning, spiritual awakening, and bringing those deeper truths into our lives. All right. So I definitely appreciate you guys if you purchase that. Subscribe to my Substack, mcdermott.substack.com. You can also book a tarot reading with me one-on-one. The links to do so are in the episode show notes below. And special thank you to Tranquil Desires, our only official sponsor here at the Fifth Dimension, located here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. #1 stop for all of your holistic and wellness needs. Well, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the podcast with James Tunney. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast for today's show, joined by, still to this day, the most featured guest of the Fifth Dimension in terms of episode and total episode length. I don't think episode lengths will be in the total amount of time cumulatively will be beat anytime soon. Joined by James Tunney, author, researcher. James, always a pleasure to be able to chat, and I'm excited to have another conversation with you and see where we go.
Does the most podcast guests get a prize at the end of all this? Great to see you again. Yeah.
I'm sure we could, there will be some sort of prize at the end of the road, although I don't know when the podcast
I'll have that book when you have it out. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, when the podcast ceases to function, when I'm deemed too much of a threat to the social systems of the AI algorithms, and you come out as the most featured guest, we will have a prize in store. Hopefully that's many years down the line, and we don't need to worry about that in the immediate future. But James, I know you got your new book that's coming out. I'd love to start just by, if you wanted to sort of explore what some of your main themes are. I know you're looking at, in particular, AI governance, and that's a topic we've certainly covered in different aspects over the course of some of our conversations. But, I'd love to kind of start by giving you the floor to, kind of uncover some of these themes. What is it that you've been really looking at in your research and writing?
Okay. I don't, in the last year or so, I think probably since we last talked, I've talked about the mythic aim of AI and explained that. And I've talked about AI and post-humanism, because already the debate is shifting from transhumanism to post-humanism. So, I mean, that's clear. So I tried to establish the connection. So this book is called AI-Govnerveance and uh, care and possession in Dustopia. So there's two words there. Maybe allowed a little Joycean freedom. So it's not governance, the theme is, but it's a play on the words where the word nerve is the center. So it's govnervance.
Mm.
Uh, to put the two of them together, and I think I'll explain why that is. So I'm talking about AI governance, but govnervance is the word that I have coined to
Mm.
try and make a to encapsulate what it is, that really this stuff is about control of your nervous system totally. So it's about the fusion of AI and your nervous system. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible for
Mm.
people through all the complexity. And it's in the context, the subtitle is Care and Possession in Dustopia. So it's not dystopia, it's dustopia based on the concept of dust. And this is critical. So what I'm arguing is that the function of AI, the totality of AI, the aim of AI, the purpose of AI, the objective of AI is and always has been to control life, to control humans.
Mm.
So it's not, and here I disagree with people like Pope Francis, who says the usual stuff that AI is just a tool. It's not just a tool. It's absolutely not just a tool. Anything that can control your total environment is obviously something more than a tool. And the word tool is insufficient to describe what it is, because obviously tools are used to describe something like a hammer or a pen or whatever. And
Mm.
when we're talking about complex systems that can encapsulate and penetrate the human physiology, the language is insufficient. So this, so what I'm saying is that the whole purpose of AI is part of the process of governing us totally, and governing the globe totally. Everything comes within AI is a part of that construct. So instead of worrying about or thinking about, well, is this like humans or is this have consciousness? This is not the issue for humans. The issue is that this is a utter and total control system that must end humanity as it exists. And that's why it fits in with the idea of post-humanity, not just an idea of augmentation, but the idea of the end of humanity. And that's quite clear that transhumanism fulfills a certain function, but posthumanism is the direction that this system intends to take us, the end of humanity. Now, of course, you might say, well, it's not the end of humanity because the human will be some kind of automaton with linked to the machine and they still exist in some way. But that's of a limited slave persistence for the purposes of the system. So the governance is based on control of our nervous system. And I can explain the origin of the history of that and the various themes in that. But in particular, it seeks to take control of us, to take care of us totally, to have a total caring system. So in doing so, it takes the idea of the human as a function of care or as a caring being, as a cooperative being, and dispenses with that and moves away from that transcendental sense to the idea of a totally technologically mediated transactional sense of the human. And it reflects an idea of the extended phenotype, whereby our genetic development is includes what we do out there. So
Mm.
the external phenotype is the houses, the infrastructure, all the things human have built, or the beaver's dam. And as well as that, the AI is seen by this philosophy to be part of us and part of our evolutionary process. So they become fused, if you like, or there's a reflexive relationship between them. So what I'm suggesting is that the substitution of technical care for our human care, which is the basis of all spiritual traditions, leads to a situation where we will be possessed technologically and then actually in a spiritual sense, our spiritual world will finish. I've put forward a concept of a spiritual dust bowl, akin or a reflection of the dust bowl that had in America and Oklahoma in the 30s, etc.
Mhm.
And the key technology is the development of smart dust and neural dust. Now, just to explain briefly for people that don't know, when we're talking about smart dust or neural dust, we're talking about very, very small pieces of technology, nanotechnology, quantum dots, things that can be distributed in the body and in the environment that can act as sensors, monitors, and controllers, interacting with an electromagnetic system to control us. So it's nanotechnology. That means it's very, very small technology. It was the technology anticipated by people like Richard Feynman. It's an idea that we can manipulate the whole world on an atomic level, on a molecular level. And including in that manipulation is our manipulation. And also this manipulation can occur in conjunction with this external system. So that's provided for already in legislation in the United States, that the human is to be programmable by external systems, by computers. So we're in summary, it's just a broad opening statement. The future is about governance. We have to focus on governance, AI governance, and I've said it's govnerveance, it's control of our nervous system, and that will take away care between individuals, community, and translate everything into a total technological environment, which will possess us through the use of smart dust, neural dust is dust that can come into your body. Again, this stuff is undetectable. There's a lot of people contact me. Please don't, because I can't help you, thinking they have, and it's a genuine problem that, there's things in their body, and the technology is there. There's buckets of patents on this. There's buckets of ways of controlling the brain now externally, magnetogenetics, all this new technologies have identified the range of things, as well as down to the neural level, as well as to have transistors at a submicroscopic level. Below, we're talking about a very, very low level. So we're talking about also a philosophical perspective that goes back to atomism and the idea that the world is composed of very small things. It's also described as smallism. So that there's an underworld there. So the science, we talk about the criminal underworld, but science has a vast underworld. All these nice scientists that tell us all the time when they're doing the sell about the hard sell, soft sell, about how great science is, and they never tell us about all the war criminals that did experiments on people, all those that they embraced in their bosom, all those scientists that did horrendous experiments on people in the name of science in the American psychiatric hospitals. People that weren't doctors, scientists. They had this operation, to dig, to drill a hole in. Well, it wasn't a drill. They hammer into the skull to cut various places in there to help them. This was the latest scientific technique that was done to loads of people in the United States on the basis of science. These people weren't even doctors that were doing it. It's quite incredible when you read about Henry Cotton and people like this. This has been universal. That since the definition of a scientist in the 1830s, moving away from natural philosophy, moving away from religion, that we've had this instrument which is purely geared towards the really advancing the military industrial complex with some things on the side. While they're telling us that science is giving us all the great advances, denying the contributions and the origin and a lot of religious and theological thought behind science, they are making people more unhealthy as the evidence is becoming clear. We're not getting healthier. The environment is getting more polluted. All the things they claim to do is an illusion pending our demise. And so we have to wake up. That's an opening statement just to get us going.
Right. And I mean, you're spot on. It's funny when you originally sent the idea for the podcast and you wrote Govnerveance. I was like,
Mm.
oh, does that mean governance? Is that a typo?
Yeah,
I didn't catch the play on words and that, but it
yeah,
makes a lot of sense. And I really like that
yeah,
because,
yeah.
you know, uh, the huge thing when we're looking at somebody like, obviously we're at the point where somebody like Elon Musk is starting to introduce something like Neuralink, right? And we're starting to see the sort of implantable pieces of tech being brought more to a mainstream level, right? Where you can start to see, okay, we can see how the steps towards a post-human society where the man-machine merger takes place. Okay, now it's starting to be out in the open. But as you kind of said, this has been something that has been working towards for a very long time, long before Elon Musk was even talking about Neuralink, or we're
Mm.
thinking about these sort of man-machine mergers on a uh, more mainstream scale. But do you think you could speak to that sort of the origins
Yes,
of that?
yes,
And
certainly. Yeah, yeah, that's a good place to go. And it's very, very interesting, of course. Now we have Musk going into politics, which I
Mhm.
have articulated the idea that he is a kind of Benjamin Franklin figure. Now, people might say, "Well, I don't see how he's like Benjamin Franklin." Well, uh, let me explain that, and let me explain a few basic concepts that I think will help people understand. Um, so I'm going to put it in an impressionistic way, so we can draw them together
Mhm.
after. But the uh, if you look at it in all the spiritual traditions, the the cloud is important.
Yep.
The cloud of unknowing, the cloud that God appears in the cloud. It's just in every tradition. The cloud is very, very important. There's a spiritual meaning behind a spiritual implication, a relationship with the divine. And in everywhere that we have a theological, a spiritual, a deep, perennial spiritual motif, uh, the technocratic movement, the military industrial complex want to appropriate it and make it material. So hence we get the cloud in mechanical terms. Now remember, of course, we're talking about Musk. His grandfather was in the technocracy movement. You
Mhm.
know, and I know people are not worried about this, but I think I think you're not reading the ruins in this. Um, so if we go back, there's a few elements in the cloud. So the cloud becomes a mechanical cloud, and in that you use like little pieces of vapor. You use dots. You use smart dust to create this mechanical cloud. Nobody really suggests that perhaps in the chemtrails are associated with dropping, sensors over. I mean, they don't understand what nanotechnology is, that there's billions and billions of sensors all around the world. Now, you would have to assume that your government wouldn't do such things, but they have told us we know what they're doing in relation to surveillance. Do you think that they wouldn't surveil to the maximum possibility, and especially when they can produce a security reason for it, and especially when they can point to disorder that they have created? Uh, People can make up their own mind on that. So the cloud is important. This mechanical cloud, everywhere there's a mirror, there's a simulacrum to the spiritual cloud, if you like. And if we go back to Benjamin Franklin, well, who is Benjamin Franklin? We know he's a great a political figure in the United States. He's a politician. He's a statesman. He's a publisher, but he's a scientist as well. He's crucially he's a scientist. So he has all this Renaissance man kind of functions. He also contributes to very specific things like the development of the postal service in the United States. Communications is critical. Post is critical in these development of international networks. What did Kant call Benjamin Franklin? He said he was the modern Prometheus. So that was how he described him in the 1750s. Now, around the time of 1750s is crucial. That was actually the time Swedenborg said that the last judgment had happened, and in some ways, he kind of might be right on a different
Mhm.
level. So Benjamin Franklin is interested in a number of things. When they excavated the house that he lived in London, because London was critical to him, because as we will bear that in mind as well, there are also nodal points around the world that are critical again and again and again and again. London, Geneva, Switzerland in general, still today, this day, California more recently in relation to technology, Berlin, Vienna, they become critical. London is the central point in many senses. And Franklin was involved in all that, in the secret societies, etc. He was involved in them. When they excavated his house, the house he stayed in London, they found the remains of a lot of people, of bodies in his house, because what had been an anatomy. Well, this is what they say, an anatomy a place where they studied. So they were studying the human body there. But he was very interested in the study of the human body and how it works. And this is a theme which we see coming right up to the Neuralink context now, excavating, trying to understand. He was the one who was appointed to investigate Mesmer and Mesmer's energy systems and hypnosis and electrical energy and that. So he's right in there. And that if you think of where that mesmerism has come to, this is what comes down to mind control, to the power of the state to control individuals, all those things that you've talked about, some of them with some of your guests. So that theme is there, is mind control, anatomy. And of course, why is he the modern Prometheus? Because what did he do? He flew his kite up into the clouds and brought down the power of the heavens. He brought down electricity on his kite. He showed that the power of the gods could be taken down and controlled by humankind. And so when he's studying electricity, what is he doing? What is electricity? Electricity was described as electrical fire. So everything is fire. This is the Promethean myth. It informs Karl Marx as it informs Benjamin Franklin. And what's Prometheus doing essentially? He's saying, I don't like these gods that are there. I want to overthrow them. I want to steal them. And that's a relationship that describes the risk-taking, firepower concentrating human. Well, it's not a human, he's a titan. He purports to give this energy, this, in fact, in some stories, to be the creator of humans. But he's not really. He's a construction that varies throughout time, that is a useful symbol, that in many ways was a replacement for Luciferian and satanic ideas. He was a kind of soft front man that was less controversial, because once you say Greece, all the imperial, oh, Greece, great, fantastic, they're so clever, and Greece and Prometheus, Greece, all that kind of stuff. So Benjamin Franklin, in many senses, anticipates the interests that we see manifest in someone like Elon Musk. And now we have Musk going into politics, which is consistent, because his interest in all of these issues become resolved in how can we govern things. And he's also the famous one that uses the snake in his about the countries or the states in the United States and coming together, which actually your new Secretary of Defense has that too, actually. But yeah. Anyway, I understand the reason for it. But the snake is an interesting symbol. The snake is also associated with electricity and with the power of the skies in mythological and indigenous terms. And in fact, A.B. Warburg, who is the person behind the Warburg Institute in Britain, who's German Jewish, he developed the modern study of magic there in many senses, based on the study of the image. He was in a mental home in Switzerland again, and he had to, in order to get out, he had to do a presentation based on his studies in America with the Hopi, I think, and the snake culture there. And he lamented in his lecture, a famous lecture, that the snake motif was now the coils of electricity in the United States and the telegraph system. So what happened with this investigation of electricity was they realized they could apply it to the body. So Benjamin Franklin was trying to cure people of depression with electricity in the mid-18th century. So was John Wesley, the great Protestant reformer. They were using electricity to cure people. In fact, it was used. William Blake was familiar with this process as well and saw it as a positive thing. So that was important. And then we see that they knew that if they could apply electricity to the body, they could make it move, they could do certain things, and they could activate dead animals. They could activate dead humans. They did experiments in public. And then we have Galvani, Aldini doing presentations. And in that milieu, we get Mary Shelley talking, and that's where Frankenstein comes from, who's also the modern Prometheus. Benjamin Frankenstein, the connection, and again, London. It's London again. So she's anticipating the impact of this electricity. And here, I mean, if you think about, well, an issue that we don't think about sufficiently when we talk about humans and we talk about life is that the definition of life is a contested thing. It may seem like the most simple thing to define, but it's not. So when they discovered electricity, they said, aha, we have it. Life is electricity. It's a force that can be controlled, and therefore we can control other people. So you had, even the Bank of England had an electrobiologist working for them. It's quite incredible. This idea that electricity could govern the body, which it clearly does in some way, and could govern society. So when we come to a modern context, we're interpreting the fact that your new government is going to be run in some senses by people who are driving this electrical agenda, while at the same time telling us that they're against electrical vehicles, for various reasons. But one of the main thinkers in it is doing so. We must understand that this electrical model goes back a long time and is deeply embedded in this system. It was the essence of the technocracy movement, was to rule by electricity, to turn all governance into electricity. And there's also an implication I think, behind it, that the human becomes, well, the human is certainly integrated into the system, but even the human could become an electrical part. Hence, you get ideas like in the Matrix film, etc., the battery, etc. That's on the cards as well. So there's a great paradox in all of this. If you listen to Elon Musk, he says that in a couple of years, the demand for electricity will create blackouts. Why? Because the sheer demands of AI will require that. So we are creating this big appetite for electricity, which influences the environment, devastating places all around the world for using slave labor to get the battery requirements. And we end up in a situation where we're a bit like John Lilly, the solid state entity that rules the world and sucks up all the resources. So the dream of the Promethean dream is set against the idea of, well, say the Judeo-Christian idea of Greco-Roman infused of the individual. Certainly, the idea of the individual is divine reflection, and etc. So there's the concept of this mechanical being, the individual as a clock, as a clockwork in a Cartesian sense, as an automaton, as we've talked about before, was heavily influenced by this idea of electricity. So then when you get robots, you get the simulacrum coming up. So robot, human, or the conscious, they're entitled, people talking about their rights already. Bostrom, who people don't really hear what he's saying exactly. He's worried about the future, the dystopia, because the robots might get a bad time. That's what he said in one of the interviews. He's not worried about the humans so much, because there's a very dominant left brain mentality, which has got rid of a lot of all the beautiful elements in favor of this mechanistic, deterministic kind of spectrum view. And as a result of that, we lose all the pretension to supernaturality, the divine, and this, in this, there's a new ideology of scientism we've talked about before, and a religion, a secular religion associated with this um, idea of progress, both left and right. It's in both sides. And in fact, a lot of the people moving to the right are from a progressive background and progressive technologically. So that hasn't gone away. And when you listen to Elon Musk, for example, talking about the need for increased birth rates, he's a big part of that is artificial birth. So there's a great movement towards ectogenesis, birth outside the womb. The literature now, the feminist literature says that we need ectogenesis to make men and women equal. So the implication of equality is to, or the dictator imperative of that is that children should be born outside a body, going back to what was decided in the 1920s in Britain, where I locate the origin of this, the modern origin of these conceptions of. So we know that from that empire of scientism, from the New World Order, the objective is to destroy the family, nation state, and religion. And that that is the objective that informs their mentality. But in that is a destruction of the human. So, in summary, electricity is critical. The concept of control of our nervous system is critical, as well as that the understanding of our nervous system as being a model for governance. There's books in the 60s, The Nerves of Governance, or go back to the Leviathan, the great political theory about why the state should control things. They talk about creating an artificial soul. The government is an artificial soul. Well, now they have the technology to do this. Now they have the technology to go the whole hog, to make a governance system which is artificial, and using the idea that it's in some way alive, it's some way a global brain, like in the human, to integrate the human so the technology penetrates the individual, and that they're part of this system, and it's some glorious collective sense, and collective spiritual sense in the wider sense. So, and in that path, the idea that we're controlled by our brain, that once you understand the brain and you see what's happening in the brain, you understand what's happening in people. You get to the situation where we have the loads of articles, loads of scientists saying that the future is the brain cloud interface. That in order to do so, in order for people to keep up with technology, with AI, they have to have insertions in their brain. It's not the big hole that Elon Musk is talking about. It's nanotechnology that can be consumed, that can come through your skin even. It's in there in the body, and then it interacts with the system. That's the model, and that's the control system. So there's a direct continuity around those themes, around those issues of electricity, the brain, the cloud, and a few other symbols. And dust is the medium of the moment. And we'll talk a bit more about dust, because dust is a very, very important term in the technologically and spiritually as well.
Right. And it's very easy to see how the progression of this has mapped into our modern technologies, connecting it back to, I just saw somebody posting about Elon Musk and his grandfather running the technocracy movement, which was funded by the government. It's nice to see people actually talking about that. For one, I don't know, always expect to see that just on a Twitter post, but you can kind of see the progression leading into what we have now. And, what's interesting with the ectogenesis, I came across some, there's a researcher on YouTube, her name is Gigi Young, and she refers back to Steiner a lot, and, a lot of the um, anthroposophic concepts when she was talking about ectogenesis or in artificial birth. She was kind of making the argument, and, say with this as you will, I don't necessarily know one way or the other, but it was very compelling when you go through the process of an artificial birth, not having the connection to the mother. You almost lose the purest essence of the soul through the artificial birth process, because you're not going through that natural process within the womb, and therefore you're not gaining the full realization of your soul, and it creates sort of an artificial human. And if you're looking at what the intentions are to create us as a um, species that really is more of a battery and not a divine being in the fundamental aspect of a human being, right? Something like an ectogenesis, where you're birthed without a soul and you're birthed through an artificial process and artificial means, it really creates a population that is uh, a brave in the a brave new world, as Huxley described
mm,
in his writings, what the world would look like, where it's all artificial, right? Where we don't have that divine access, that divine consciousness. And if we're a
mm,
battery, we're fueling this machine, if you will. And I find it very interesting with Elon Musk, to bring it back to him, they call it the Department of Government Efficiency. Well, the nature of efficiency is a machine, wouldn't it? Right? It's kind of, it
mm,
plays into the whole aspect of a machine. They want to simplify it. They want to make it less complex, want it to operate with a more efficient standard. And to me, when I heard that, it made me think back to some of our other chats of,
mm,
well, that just kind of sounds like they're creating a little bit more of a machine. They're fine tuning the machine. They're simplifying the machine, making it more, and on the surface, efficiency sounds like a nice prospect. It sounds like a nice ideal. But when you look at, all right, well, what is the larger intention behind it? Well, if they
mm,
want systematic efficiency, well, then it makes sense that he is going to be the one spearheading that, because that is what he is creating through all of his technologies. It's this merging of, uh, I would say, consciousness to more of a standard of efficiency and more machine-like processing through all of his technologies, not just in government. But you're right, and that government feels like the necessary next step for him. Uh,
mm,
so I just found that fascinating, and that's all just in the last 2 weeks, that he started stepping into that role. So
yeah.
all sort of new developments, but at the same time, the foundation has been there for so long that it's just such a natural next step. And of course, you have so many people cheering it on in a lot of ways, and bringing, because I noticed one of the very first things he tweeted, James, after he was elected, after Trump was elected, Trump tweeted out a picture, Novus Ordo Seclorum, of New Order of the Ages, right? So it's putting it right out there. Here's our new order of the ages of efficiency, the new world order, if you want it. And
Mm,
even then, you look at the comments, people are cheering it on. Let's go, a new order of the ages. And uh, it just fascinates me that it people are worried about a new world order, and they're worried about a global conspiracy, but yet here's a man who clearly is creating all the technologies to help put that in place, but it's branded as freedom, it's branded as what the people want to hear, and so it's quick to bypass it and view him as a savior of sorts
mm.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and actually, Putin was talking about the New World Order in the last week as well. So if we go back to our previous talks, and I emphasized that the signs of the New World Order, as we see it manifest in Wells or J.D. Bernal, is space travel is critical. It's number one, space exploration, life extension, and intelligence extension, and at least two of them, Elon Musk is a world leader in it. So it's utterly consistent. You can't look at things when you're so close to it, and you look at things consistently. Well, here is the things we're looking for. As I said, to look for these things. There it is. There it is, right in your face. Um, and remember, now again, I didn't have any of this Trump derangement thing at all. I bet on Trump, as I said before, originally. So, but that having been said, he did say at a rally that he was going to bring in the army to deliver, those
Mhm.
injections, and he did say that, and I couldn't believe that people didn't, say a word. He's still very proud of all that system, um, uncritically, not an inch of criticism about the biggest thing that has happened, since he came into the political scene, he was behind it. So he could be willingly behind the other thing, especially with all this goodwill that is there. Oh, he's on our side, etc. So, I mean, it's a difficulty that one has to watch. I'm not saying it's inevitably so, but if we're not looking at what the real game is, there's great difficulty. Now, as I've said, the nodal points occur in places like Switzerland. So there's a nervous system to this, to this global system. And we can see this London, Switzerland, going back to the evolution of Marxism, going back to changes in the Catholic Church, going back to technology, nervous system. There's loads of connections with Switzerland. The Office of International Migration that's behind a lot of this stuff is in Geneva, as well as the World Intellectual Property, the World Trade Organization. It goes on and on and on and on. Switzerland is exercising influence in this. People have forgotten about the currency issue, that it's very, very possible that you have a collapse in the dollar as a reserve currency opportunity. They're working in Switzerland. They have been working on currency, on digital currency. So all that can come very, very quickly. It could come through a crisis which was induced, whatever like that. And oh, look, we're forced to induce this system. Even the solutions to the migration problem in the United States are heavily dependent on digital changes. Everything contributes. So it's a bit like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or in judo when you're fighting on the ground. Mm-hmm. So you may be focusing on them choking you, on getting their arm, fighting off the hands around the neck. Then you have to be aware of them getting your arm a kimura or a lock of some type. Then if you're more advanced, you have to be focusing on getting a knee bar or a foothold or a toe hold or whatever. So the problem when at that level is that people are watching for one thing and then the point of attack switches. So they've done loads of things that have been very successful. Launch a war, no problem. Launch another war, launch a pandemic, all these things can be alternated. So we have to bear in mind the financial one can come. And these things are outside the hands of the national leaders. They can only respond to them. Oh, look at this terrible thing that has happened because of such and such, and it leads to another opportunity to enmesh the individual in this system. And I mean, it's clear that you're getting a digital currency. So say, don't worry about it. You'll be very wealthy. You'll get 100,000 doofers a year. Evan, don't worry about it. You'll be able to buy things out of the government truck store here. And this person, you can get 200,000, or we like you. You're in one of the favourable categories, etc., etc., etc. And we can do social justice. You're actually in a group. Sorry, Evan, you're in a group that's been oppressing people. So we're going to take off 50,000. This is what the plan is. This is what the plans and the systems are in once you get a currency that is digital. When you talked about the womb, there's another element to it. There's the uterine transplantation. Now, down the road here, they pioneered about 10 years ago womb transplants, and they were successful, and children were born. And theorists are saying now that if you have a person who wants to change their sex, gender, their gender really, and they identify as a man, identifies as a woman, they should be legally entitled to get a womb transplant. This is the argument that's coming in the literature recently from this, because it's becoming technically. Now, there's loads of big problems with that, but it shows you what the thinking is, what the thinking process is. Now, of course, there's major problems with that, but you anticipated in that the issue that's inherent in the mother, the womb, and what's the word matrix come from? It's the womb. That's what matrix comes from. So we see that it's the same thing again. It's the desire to appropriate all the sacred functions that are identified with figures. In this case, we can talk about, give the example of the Virgin Mary, to appropriate that into the mechanical mother, the mechanical machine. The words metropolitan, of course, come as well from the mother. Even materialism, the word material refers back to the mother, matter. So that etymologically, they're all manifestations of the mother, strangely, in the hard technological terms. So the effort is to create a big mechanical mother. And this is a deeply ingrained methodology, philosophy it's insufficiently talked about. And another, even this is facilitated. We talked about, I mentioned Franklin and the postal system. The telecommunications network is the nervous system of the new world order. And if we go back to neuroanatomy, some of there's a crossover with some of the terminology. So they talk about cables in relation to and cable explanations, and when they're measuring the electrical impulse in nerves, they talk about there's a cable formula because it was developed by Lord Kelvin in the complex of telecommunications cables or telegraph cables. They were the same. What the British Empire was doing was laying down the nervous system of the world when they were developing the telegraph system. So they were laying down what would be the nervous system of the future technological world. They laid it down on the sea routes around the world. And then everyone that was involved in the New World Order, we take Arthur C. Clarke, we see telecommunications, supposedly invents the satellite in favor of he says borders are finished. He explains that people can alter the world culturally so that we kind of return to Babylon in some way, which is a daft idea that underpins their idea of going back to the Garden of Eden, of going back and recreating the Tower of Babel with digital terms so they believe in the Bible as well, but they believe if they can go back there, they can recreate the world because God won't have any power on the basis of what Genesis says. And even when we think of the word Genesis, we have its simulacrum, genetics. The Virgin Mary was the genetrix, in the mother of God sense in the terms. We have companies of that name. The crossover is ridiculous once you begin to look at it. They're trying to desacralize the world, and they're doing it with these concepts. And even when we talk about smart dust, well, what do all the spiritual theories tell us? You come from dust and you're going back to dust. Mm. They tell us this. You are created from dust. The spirit was put into the dust. In the story of Care or Cura in the Roman legends, we're identified with Care because it was Care who put the humanness into the dust. That's why Care was identified with the human. It's a fundamental, it's who we are, if you like. Whereas the scientists say, well, actually, you're an ape and you're a reptile with a reptilian brain. Now, both of those theories that seem to be scientific are not scientific because we're not apes. We're not apes. We may have common ancestors, but we are not apes. There's a clear difference. And also, in the scientific literature, we don't have a reptilian brain. So when people love Carl Sagan, oh, he's great, space travel, space exploration, life, all this kind of stuff, religion bad, me nice. And he's presenting sometimes stuff that's not scientific when they're talking about the reptilian brain. So there's a constant reduction of the human. You see it in Arthur C. Clarke, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Without science, we were just apes with tools. That was the image, and then this machine could, to rewrite the story. Yes, this is a really serious movement, and it's compounded by other things. This idea that the increasing difficulty for women to have a natural childbirth. I know we can't have that, legal reasons, and they're moving away all the time from natural childbirth. They don't want it because they want to control that. And when we take all the the control of birth that has happened. We see, for example, that in Ireland the birth rate is dropping. It's not sustainable in relation to what was the indigenous Irish people. It's declining. It's declining in all the countries. Oh, then they say so. They provide a technology to reduce birth. They encourage people to reduce birth, and the solution to that will be as well used the excuse of migration to dehomogenize the nation, so there'll be no opposition to this new world order, and at the same time create the condition to say, well, listen, we need a technological solution. Come on now with them, that those machines that you have with the babies can be born. What a great service we're doing to humanity, and we need more of those transplants as they make the interchangeability of the human body and the interoperability seem commonplace. You notice, for example, there's a sad rise in people having their intestines removed. There's a terrible rise in that without scientific explanation. The scientists are great except when you need them. All these things happening and they have no answer for it. They have no they have no hypothesis, explanation, or interest because they're not getting paid, but they're getting paid for other elements of it. But the consequence of all these things are a replacement of parts in the body because we're being made less able to live in the poisoned environment that they are creating, and that will continue until we are reduced to a necessary dependent on their system. So the womb, those examples that you give are utterly consistent with these movements. So as I've said before in our talks, if you look at what they've said they were going to do 100 years ago, take over the world by scientific corporations, by state, etc. Everything is ongoing. Everything is consistent. Everything is explicable. And the idea that it's just all a succession of people that are concerned for you is a myth, and they don't, especially when they're taking away the intellectual underpinnings of a Western society in particular.
Definitely. And it feels like there's a great sterilization process, if you will, of not just our biological function, as you mentioned, but as in the environment, as you mentioned, to where, the only uh, they'll phrase it as the only method of survival is to become so dependent upon this mechanical system and adapt to it so that we can adapt to the world, when the reality is they're creating the world as this so that we can be forced to adapt. It's a very
Yes.
it's a very manipulative process because it's a classic case of problem reaction solution, if you will. You create the problem, you drive a reaction, and then you implement your imposed ideal solution, right? So if you create a sterile environment where humans are no longer able to survive within it based upon their own natural biological processes, well, we can turn you mechanical, we can give you artificial wombs, we can have this, we can have that. And it's very much like treating human beings as if they're an automobile, right? We'll replace the engine. Oh, you need you need get rid of your intestines. We'll be able to run just fine without it, right? And it's interesting. When I was 4 years old, I had a kidney removed. We have two kidneys, so I can function with just one, but I had one removed. And I even look back and I sit back and wonder, I'm like, okay, well, they just removed it. Did they even necessarily attempt to diagnose the root issue and kind of get to the what was the foundation of why did it need to be removed? I don't even know, right? I was only 4 years old, not like I had a say in the matter, right? Um, but you can kind of look at that as a mechanical process. Oh, let's just remove it. Let's just take it on out, right? And then, I'm surviving just fine on one, but it doesn't necessarily tell me what the root cause was or why it happened. And it was very much, all right, Evan's body is a mechanical thing. Let's just remove it. Boom, problem solved. No big deal. And I'm healthy and doing just fine on just one. And, maybe for my survival, they did need to remove it, but that doesn't necessarily uh, do away with the fact that it's a very mechanical process of how they treated the medical operation and the diagnosis and going through that, right? So it's fascinating to see the sterilization of society come to this level with technology being the only savior that we're going to quote unquote have, right? As this continues to ramp up, and I think we're seeing more of the Bill Gates proposing, oh, we're going to block the sun, and I'd say they're already doing that through the chemtrails and through
Yes.
the dust that you mentioned that they're spraying into the air and the nanotechnology
Right, yeah.
that is already present. I've had the same thing where people actually have reached out to me where they talk about having, and I think we've talked about this once before, where they talk about having an implantable within them, right? And there's people who,
Mm.
um, I just recently did a podcast where we touched a little bit on sort of the disclosure project and sort of the more of the deep state, you could say, if you want to call it UFOs or whatever it may be. But there's people who they get abducted and then there these horrific, traumatic medical experimentation that takes place, and there people are being they're put certain technologies into people, right? That's a very real shadow side to this technological movement that is taking place behind the scenes that I'm not sure people are fully aware of. And I've heard people even theorize that, let's say you go in for a surgery and you get put under, you get technology put into you. I don't know if there's full truth to that. I mean, who knows? That maybe they could have done something when I was 4 years old and they removed a kidney. It's not like I'm going to know. But where you get these implantable technologies into you through specific surgical processes. But I do believe, it's at the point where you create like a smart dust, like you were kind of alluding to and mentioning, where if you're just inhaling and breathing it in and it's entering into your body. Now, you could say the digestive process of the body is gonna, in how in consuming it might be a little bit different than if it's directly injected or implanted. It's kind of the difference of somebody getting an injection of aluminum versus breathing in aluminum, right? It's going to interact with your body in a much different way. If you inject it, it might break the blood-brain barrier and, have all sorts of problems from that as opposed to ingesting it. Neither are necessarily ideal. But either way, these things are entering into our body today at this point, and that trend isn't going to reverse. And it's very clear to me it's only going to amplify as it becomes a bit more mainstream and accepted. Because I'm sure there's going to be a point where they introduce these nanoparticles and nanotechnologies to the mainstream scientific community and offer it as a solution, even if it's not so out in the open right now. It's the same thing with how Neuralink, it's taken the progression it has to where Ray Kurzweil talks about by 2030, everybody's going to have an injectable as the norm, an implant as the norm, where recently, originally it was just, oh, it'll help people with spinal cord injuries or help people regain vision or, it's proposed with here's the benefit for a specific group, but then down the line it becomes, here's why it benefits everybody. Here's why it's the norm, right? And I think it's going to be the same thing with this nanotechnology as to why it is a vital part of society, whether that be in the environment or whether it be putting it into us directly, you know.
Yeah, and there was an authorized or wasn't unapproved biography of Musk, and it was quite clear that they had no, they weren't motivated for, to help disabled, and they understood that they needed to sell it on that basis. It's always this thing. Oh no, look, we're doing it for this purpose. What I'm what I'm concerned about is mass total coverage with dust, and I believe it's going to happen. It probably is happening, and the idea that they were going to drill a big hole in the head was a distraction.
Mm.
So the technology is so small that they can spread it in the environment. They do spread on the battlefield already. There's billions of these things. These sensors are used
Mhm.
to implement all these electrical systems. They're used in everywhere to help with the. And again, once you have your electrical cars, oh, we need sensors on the walls to help to avoid things. It's constant, constant. And of course, they're so small, they're invisible. They're used in a lot of contexts, and there's a justification, a security justification. Oh, we need to stop, the something coming in. We need to have dust in the air to stop attack by gas clouds or whatever like that. There's 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 thousands of justifications, and it seems that there is an idea that all the globe will be covered everywhere with dust. That this is one idea which is clear, and I think that will be part of the global governance scheme, and they can create enough dangerous threats to justify that. But it's because it's in some way invisible, people don't seem to, because it's in the underworld, people don't seem to be as concerned. Now, I was in America at the time that uh, the COVID stuff was starting, and all of a sudden on the news, if you remember, they were showing the pattern of people traveling on the basis of their mobile phones and all that. Now, I'm not sure that everyone knew in America at that time that all their movements were being tracked on such a mass way, and in fact that it was planned to do so. By the same token, another crisis comes, and something else is revealed. If you listen to Yuval Noah Harari, he thought that he was saying at the time, "Oh, this people will look back on this, era and of that health stuff and understand that the world shifted because it's coming into your body. It's coming into your body." And it was consistent with a view that he didn't say that, but of a mass technological involvement or penetration of the human body, and of course, carbon nanotubes, and with graphene, with crystals, and types of fluoride as well. So I mean, in the 1960s, there was a woman near me in Dublin who challenged the fluoridization of water in Ireland, and she argued that was mass medication. She went to the Supreme Court. It was defeated. She argued it interfered with right to bodily integrity. But in retrospect, that was a very astute observation, and her instincts were very, very strong. And now they're talking about getting rid of it in the United States. I think they've done so here in Sweden. I think it was one of the countries that did, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. I think I read that recently. So, because I was trying to identify the composition, but so they're realizing there's something wrong with that thing. But that's an example that, on the basis of supposedly protecting people's teeth, they can do something, and that's a known project, and people weren't bothered with that. I think history will reveal things on that. In relation to you're right. In relation to the or in relation to Gates, and they started out in Sweden putting that stuff up in the air. And I mean, I'm watching these things crisscross in the sky, and nobody would convince me. I mean, it's gaslight to suggest that it's ordinary stuff. They did start, and then they said they stopped. But there's all kinds of reasons they can put forward, especially now that Sweden's part of NATO, as there was, to detect the Russians, detect the missile, all kinds of reasons, if there is stuff there. But the key thing is, because it's dust and dispersed, people can't know in the same way. So there's a benefit to the surreptitious possibilities associated with reducing things to the smallest level. And this is the philosophical basis of a lot of this is atomism, and the idea that everything is explicable on a small level. And that atomistic view explains everything about genetics, evolution, eugenics. It's all based on this, oh, we found a solution. It's in the small thing. And it leaves the big thing out. It leaves the life itself. It leaves the possibility of a God out of the thing, because they believe everything is explicable and by manipulating on the smallest level. So there's a deep philosophical that goes with that, a philosophical view, which goes back to the ancient Greeks, to Democritus and Leucippus and all those thinkers, and that manifested a different view from a kind of holographic view or a more holistic view, and it leads to different results. So there's a kind of set of belief systems nested in each other, from atomism, and that was linked with Epicurus as well, and an Epicurean sense of the world and how you negotiated the world, and the pain and pleasure is a critical element. Pain and pleasure was the basis of the utilitarian theories of Bentham, says that everything governance is about pain and pleasure. So then there you see the model. So you use pain and pleasure to manage the individual, to manage the social operation. And you reduce the world to this explanation. You take out all the higher elements, all the deeper elements, and you come to an explanation which is based on really looking at the smallest things. And also a sense that if you control the smallest things, then you control reality. Because obviously, another great Promethean mission was, and described as that, was the atomic bomb. Now, the atomic bomb, again, by going to the smallest, you release the power, and that was all about atomic fire. So it was the fire thing again. It was the Promethean thing. And Oppenheimer was described as Prometheus. And I haven't seen the film, but I have seen extracts where the motif of the snake is involved in it. And again, the book was based on a reference to Prometheus. The Manhattan Project has been described as Promethean in various books, and secret, and even beyond the control of a lot of the stuff that happened was beyond the control of central government. And this is consistent with what Bernal predicted, that it would be about the scientific corporations taking over the world. So then we're told the scientists do it for our interest, that actually all these bombs in the atmosphere, all the atomic bombs that certainly destroyed something in the atmosphere and certainly inflicted loads of indirect injuries and direct injuries, and certainly made the world insecure, and certainly didn't contribute to global peace, that these are the great gifts that these scientists have given us in their wisdom. Well, you know what I mean? Those gifts you can keep to yourselves, thanks very much. And, we'll make one and then the world will be safe. Well, we need to make another one, and we need to make another one, and then we need to make 10,000 of them and keep on making them with constant threats as a result. So science, apart from scientism, the science where they are guns for hire for the mechanical or the military industrial complex, has been one of the worst forces in the last 100 years. Apart from scientism, proper science itself, because they were doing proper science. But when you're amoral, immoral, unscrupulous, sell yourself to the highest bidder, contribute or see an interest to be part of the military industrial complex, when you have an entire research system, as was set up in the United States with Vannevar Bush and that, entire research system directed towards this, the results are not good. That's where cybernetics came from as well, in Britain and America. Cybernetics, steering, governance of the human, through behaviorism and through control. And that's the future we face. All thanks to science, scientism in its present incarnation. And in that context, I'm increasingly defending religion itself, not just spirituality, because it has become very fashionable, and I do defend spirituality on its own, but I'm also defending religion, because what this thing needs to do, what the thing needs to do, is to get rid of family, nation, state, religion. So insofar as there are things they want to get rid of, why do they want to get rid of? Because they stand in its way. They will provide opposition to the thing they're meant to do. When they get rid of those things, it's all over. So the Archbishop of Canterbury had to resign there. I saw a figure, I don't know, through 3,000 churches closed on his watch. In Scotland, the Episcopalian Church of Scotland has been wiped out, and the old churches across sold off. Same thing here in Sweden. Even in the established church, or was established church, in the dominant church in Sweden, most of the people don't believe in God anyway, but all the old churches are being sold off right across Europe. So and the same thing is happening to Catholic churches as well. So that's objective is well on the way. So they're well on the way to destroying the institution of Christianity uh, in the Western world, in Europe, and that means that there is less opposition. These should have been the sources or opposition to this thing, and they're not. They won't be there. So
Right.
I'll go back to you for
Yeah. No,
actually.
and it's interesting because you can see how that plays out, and it's almost like there's like the writings of a new social contract in a lot of ways, because I think the implementation of the technology and the actual rolling of it out is dependent upon the socialization of ourselves to the tech itself, and for us to have a willingness to engage almost in a relationship with this system to where we give it a level of sentience and dependence. So if we can be socialized to become dependent upon it, where, previously a lot of people, they are rooted in their family or they're rooted in the church and they have a deeper connection to a higher power that isn't just surface level, right? I think that's my main critique of religion nowadays, is a lot of it is it's not rooted in the deep traditions of the concepts. One of the things we mentioned before hopping on the podcast how I did the 10-day meditation retreat, the Buddhist retreat. The one thing I appreciated the most about it was how deeply rooted it was in the original teachings of the Buddha, and not straying from it and trying to put it. I mean, there's elements of trying to put it into a modern context and modernity, but it was so by the book to the original teachings and original structure to the practice that there was a deep level of reverence I have for it, and that I could feel and experience in the retreat, right? So I think a lot of times our modern day religions, they're rooted, there's been an uprooting from their foundations in itself, which makes people sort of more passive churchgoers and passively connected to a higher power. And the what's replaced that is this, you've all know Harari said, we will become the gods. We are creating the gods, creating God in our image. And I think there's a very much a I would say culture of self worship, but technological worship as the system and technology becoming this higher power, where, social media is showing us our nature as one interconnected being that is humanity. It like captures that in a technological lens to where here we are sitting you uh, we're in two different entire continents right now. There's a whole ocean between us, and we're able to sit and have a conversation and chat, right? So it, in a way, it takes that spiritual foundation of oneness and interconnectivity and inverts it into a more surface level uh, feeling of interconnectivity, right? And so we're willing to outsource that knowing of oneness into the tech, because it's oh, there it is, it's presenting it, it's demonstrating, right? It's a world wide web. They use that word web for a reason. It's a web of interconnectivity, right? It's the wordplay is always fascinating to me, when you get down to the etymological roots, and I think they call it the web for that reason, because it represents a um, vast interconnection between all of us. But it feels to me like that socialization that's taken place has been the foundation, um, along with obviously the creations of the technologies. But the creation of the technology itself wouldn't have mattered without that deconstructing of our old social identities, and that deconstructing of the connection to our ancestors and to our roots and to who it is that we actually are. Because now we kind of have a crisis of identity in a lot of ways, I think, in modern society. And it's like, well, who are we going to become? And here come the creators of this ideal technocratic world, and kind of giving us a new path forward. Here's the next stage of our evolution. Here's the way where man is meant to enhance with the machine and become the gods. This is who we're meant to be next, right? And if we don't have a connection to those roots, where it's very easy to be swept up into the illusions and false promises. I think that that could bring.
Yeah, there's two elements, well, a number of elements. The Promethean idea leads to an idea that you want to displace the existing gods.
Mhm.
And it's not even to replace yourself with it, which is a usual one, which we can see in a kind of Nietzschean idea of this the Superman, the superhuman. Um, for some of them, it's a nihilistic one. It's just to destroy what's there already. That's even evident in certain things that Marx has said. So the system perishes. It's a purely destructive thing in some iterations. And then there's the other idea that they will create God. They're openly saying this. They're openly saying this. The hubris is remarkable. And this goes back to, again, Greek legends and Icarus and Daedalus. And that was the thinking behind Haldane, another one of those thinkers around with Bernal and Wells and Churchill and Birkenhead and all those guys that were in Britain. Because it was, again, I locate, as I've said before, all of this in the British Empire, informed by others, that extends itself into the United States, continuing its nexus. The nexus is still there, Atlanticist, and then cosmopolitanizing through its surrogates. China was a surrogate of Western technology, as Brzezinski really indicates. They don't get the technocratic order without the help of the West, without the help of the United States. And Brzezinski, I think, kind of indicates that Brzezinski in the United States is the one who explains the new technotronic era and total control. It's coming from the United States as well, as well as an element in this Atlanticist regime. But yeah, the tradition is critical, as you've said, and the traditional motifs that you mentioned. So I support that. And in many senses, there's, people confuse some concepts. Traditionalism is not the same as conservatism, for example. They may overlap, but they're not necessarily so. So you can be traditional without being conservative. It means different things. People have to get a bit more careful about the terminology they use. So I support the tradition as well. So, for example, uh, I come from a Catholic background, and uh, I support all the perennial traditions, in particular Buddhism, Islam, and Taoism, and Vedanta, and Hinduism. I support those religious approaches and spiritual approaches, and the endeavor in all the perennial tradition is really you should know the tradition you come from in particular. Um, in America, they refer to Christian often as being Protestant, not Catholic. So they say, "Oh well, I'm Christian and you're Catholic." Incredible inversion. I hear that a lot. But if you look at the Catholic tradition and the Christian tradition, if you want, and you go back to or again, if you look back at say Augustine and the City of God, for example, in the 300s, he's born in the 300s, he's discussing issues that people are discussing today as if they're new, like Gnosticism and Manichaeism and these things, and going through them in a very, very logical sense that we don't hear today, despite the fact that people can easily come on and discuss theological things and think they are discussing, and they do it in a very superficial way. And in the spiritual movement, there's a lot of nonsense going on in the New Age movement, the spiritual traditions. In particular, coming from a Catholic tradition, the amount of nonsense I'm hearing about the history of Catholicism, what it is. For example, what you do is, if you're coming, remember the New World Order wants to destroy religion, okay?
Mhm.
So you come on a podcast and you say, Inquisition. Oh, yeah, yeah, the Inquisition, the Cathars. Oh, yeah, yeah, the Cathars. All the money, you just do it. You just repeat all the shibboleth. There was more Catholic priests killed in the Spanish Civil War in 5 years than there was during the whole, people killed during the whole Spanish Inquisition of 500 years. And this is by people who are linked to the movements that are around us now. And they don't care about it. They sing songs celebrating them. They celebrate some of these. And the Spanish Civil War was brutal. It was even brutal between the communists, the Trotskyists, and the Stalinists. Some of the people that we present as heroes today were involved in these wars. Now, what I say is that materialism, ultra-materialism, it doesn't matter whether you're a Marxist or a neocon Marxist or a BlackRock investment company CEO or whatever. I call it BlackRock Bolshevism. It's the same thing, ultra-materialism, denial of the spirit, seeking control systems, seeking to control the human. So I support things that are oppositional to that. And in that, there's other interesting themes which I hear again, so I hear people in the music industry constantly going on about abuses that did occur, obviously, in the churches. But it's got very distorted, that there's a magnification and an amplification inconsistent with what happens in other sports. So we never hear musicians singing about the abuse in the pop music industry, in the rap music industry. They don't sing songs about that, funny enough. They know that it's an easy card to play because this is the system promoting them to do so. At the same time, there's massive abuse going on in the industries, massive that have been telling us, and stuff that is people cannot contemplate the scale of it. It's utterly consistent from the 1960s. So there's an imbalance there that I think at this stage we have to be really look at what the bigger game is, what the objective is, and what's been used very successfully to alter people's perspective. There has to be balance and judgment. There has to be understanding of what the entire history is. There has to be knowledge. It's very, very difficult to, for example, if you take, so we hear a person give the example of jiu-jitsu, and they say, well, I got my black belt of this person, got black belt of that, and that brings us back to Kano in the 1800s in Japan, for example. Now, in the Catholic tradition, they say, well, this goes back to Christ. This is the lineage. So the same thing with the Buddhist traditions. When you have a lineage and that goes back to ancient sources, which have a tradition associated with it, it can't be dismissed for some half-baked, ill-informed, ahistorical, non-historical, propagandistic piece, which is designed to or calculated to promote the interests of the military-industrial complex, even if the people themselves don't realize it. So we need more nuance and we need more discipline in relation to the arguments as well. But there's a massive attack, and at this stage, it will be rebellious to believe in things like Christianity and the way it's going in certain places in Europe. I mean, it is very small anyway in Sweden, despite the statistics. Because you have to look deeper into them and what they mean, look at surveys and look at what it actually means in a very secular society. So those battles are kind of almost over in some kind. Once you take these things away, it's very, very easy to present a simulacrum to them. It's very easy to present a simulacrum of ancient ideas. So, for example, I'm a little bit skeptical about the modern contemporary re-articulation of non-duality. And I hear people in India saying about non-duality, but the Advaita tradition is the Advaita tradition. It's not non-duality. Non-duality is a recent articulation in the United States in particular, as far as I can see. And it also, interestingly, parallels non-binary, parallels certain connections. Oh yeah, you're not this and you're not that. The implications, there's a possibility of it being marshaled for other purposes in relation to associated with movement away from divisions that are recognized in human culture for a long time. We're facing a massive assault on the conceptual structure of our world, and it goes back to deeply embedded ideas of evolution. So, for example, in the theories of evolution, we forget that people like Huxley, Julian Huxley, explained as well about degeneration, that degeneration was possible. And I believe we're experiencing a degeneration of humans. Now, I'm not saying that in any old-fashioned moral way, but an actual degeneration on a number of different levels, which is intended to be a dispiriting in particular, uh, a, a demoralization. The word demoralization means what it says, taking away the moral structure. So a critique that I'm having against there's a lot of I'm spiritual but not religious, and you say, well, okay, well, what is the bit of religion? Oh well, people are doing this. Usually a gross caricature of all the things. I'm not saying you're doing that, but you can hear this. Usually a gross character, and they know nothing about it. They know nothing about the tradition. They know nothing about what the people do or how it's useful, and particularly with the old traditions, or particularly, or if you don't want to call Buddhism a religion, whatever, in the old philosophies, the old perennial philosophy, or Taoism, whatever. So there's often a caricature of it. And then you say, well, okay, well, you're spiritual, but you're not religious. So what social rules do you see comes from your spiritual but not religious thing? So, are you in favor of killing, or again, do you have any view on that?
Hmm.
And it's only a few simple things that unite all the great traditions about not killing, about not lying. There's only a few, not stealing. It's not much. The right words, right thoughts, etc. There's not being attached to things, and so there's a few core concepts in the perennial things, but spiritual, not religious, often says, well, no, I don't want to say about other, you know what I mean? And this, unfortunately, we need this exterior context as well. We need to have certain rules to function. We need to have trust. If I watch anything on the mainstream media, uh, you become very, very conscious, if you know anything, that they're lying to you the whole time, that it's constant lies, that people are programmed to lie, that they're obviously morally disposed to lie all the time. That some of the people may believe that, but they can't believe that. I know that they're just reading scripts and things like that, but that there's a deep lie. And in all the spiritual traditions, you're not allowed, you're not meant to. Of course, people do it all the time, but not as your modus operandi. And societies can't work on that basis. Vague things like trust, for example, these are the essence of communities that come from spiritual traditions, building communities based on trust, based on predictability, based on non-damage, based on giving space to people to develop, based on not enforcing your will on them. So we're openly moving towards a zero trust society, because what they're doing is they're substituting the transcendent values with transactions. We're moving from the transcendent to transactions, and every transaction can be done with technology. So that translates all the spiritual values into transactions, and therefore they're not needed anymore. So the deeper things that come from interdependence, etc., they don't work. And every religious philosophy is based on some ethic associated with the other person, recognizing the other person, and helping the other person, caring for the other person. Good Samaritan, for example. Um, but these things are then sucked in, or vacuum packed in, so you don't have any room to maneuver, because the technology appropriates all these things. And even when we're meeting here, people say, oh, what are you giving out about technology, Tunney? Because you wouldn't be able to do this without the technology. Uh, that's like saying that the sweet that the child catcher gave to the child, you're not recognizing that it's sweet. Of
Hmm.
course, there's a lure in all of these things. Of course, we're still in and I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at a picture of you. And that picture of you is
Hmm.
created by pixels, and the pixels again are the dots that can construct reality. Um, so I can't swear that you're not artificial intelligence, and you won't be able to swear soon that I am.
Right.
We have enough talks to do that we could mix it up and wouldn't be able to say, well, were we say, was this artificial or not? This is where it's gone. We know that. But then, of course, by then they'll have our biometric data in the machine that will be able to verify the thing. So we get this acceleration process. But people they fall for all the lures. So I like the fish going up and they see the shine and they go for all the time. They say, but did you not see it was a shiny thing up there? It was free, and you say, well, hold on, there's a catch to this. And the whole system, the net, the web, as you said, they indicate this cap development. So our consciousness is being captured now. And the other concept that I talk about a lot is possession. We're being possessed technologically. And that is a prelude to actual spiritual possession. And religion is based on the word to bind. Now we're facing, as I've talked before about tech bondage, we're being bonded and we're having simulacra presented to us. So you have the rise of, for example, the feminine, of the dominatrix. You can see it in particular from the 1980s if you look at the term. The goddess, worship, kneel, etc. And the idea that, oh, your slavery will be nice. And this is what Huxley told us was going to happen. And one of his brothers, or one of his relations, that it's not mentioned so much, won the Nobel Prize for studying nervous system. So the Huxleys were studying the nervous system. He looked at the signaling process in the giant octopuses and things like that. That's what his speciality was, because the British upper class have been looking at the nervous system going back to those for a long time, but in particular with the concentration, electricity, anatomy, and then when they realized, when they sent all the poor fellows off the war, they came back, they were traumatized, they realized, with shell shock, with nervous disorders, they realized they could manipulate people psychologically once they were in such a state, and by using trauma on the nervous system. And they have taken those systems and integrated them into mass psychology, mass control. They know how to manipulate us. They have known for 100 years. And all of these systems are geared towards very specific control of our nervous system, shock and all of the nervous system, moving to the future where we become linked, where we have a penetration of an external system with our internal system. And the last point, Spencer, who was one of the kind of evolutionary, who wrote about evolution at the time of Darwin, he said, what is life? Life is the accommodation of the internal to the external. This is what they reduced it to. It's very, very important to look at what some of these think life is. It's the adaptation of the internal to the external. So that's consistent with this point. Okay, well, if we change all the exterior, the people will have to adapt to that, and the people will have to evolve in that way, and it goes together. The eugenics, the genetics, the rejection of God, the rejection of religion. That's why I'm more openly now not defensive. People have distinguished between the institution of religion with a small I and the institutions of religion in the institution of religion. And then the religion itself that may be misused by the people that control it, because these have been appropriated as well. The systems have been taken over as well. So the tradition, for example, becomes important, and what element of it is. So I'm against superficial critiques that don't bear historical scrutiny. So, for example, the magnification of the Spanish Inquisition was part of the black legend propagated by the British at the time of the Peninsular Wars. They blew up this to make the Spanish people bad, and it's a consistent thing that has survived, and people prefer propaganda to historical reality, despite all the arguments you can make. And then you come down to, it's just got so bad now in relation to people that seen themselves as enlightened when they just trot out what are effectively propaganda things. So we need to be disciplined in relation to the things, and you're right to emphasize the benefit, the direct benefit of the tradition in the example in
Mm.
the pattern and context that you talked about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I think the uprooting of that tradition, like you mentioned, it to me it feels like that was the way to create a world that is more transactional as opposed to transcendent, because the transactional, as you talked about, it feeds, it's not just a transaction with the system, it's a transaction in how we approach one another. What can I get from you? What can I take from here? What are you going to give me? Right. And everything is very much, um, even the essence of who we are is commoditized
Mm.
to live within the confines of this larger transactional mechanical system, right? And that's going to
Yeah.
very easily pave the way for the things such as social credit scores, and when you start rolling out um, digital identification. And it's fascinating because everybody in the United States, for example, is, oh, we need voter ID laws, we need all these. And you could, yeah, you probably should, if you're going to have a voting system, you probably should have a system of verification for the people voting. But to me, it just looks like, okay, well, people are calling for a more stringent uh, identification process. What better way than to roll out a digital identification system, right? Verify the identity for you, for those who are going to vote digitally. We're talking about, oh, the Federal Reserve is going to collapse and we need a stronger backing for the financial system. Well, we've already got cryptocurrencies, we've already got Bitcoin, we've already got all of these digitalized commodities, right, that are
Mm.
readily available for people. So, I mean, the groundwork is already so in place for this transactional based economy that because we're already living, I'd say, a transactional lifestyle and transactional in our relationships, the transition into digitalizing it is going to be it's going to be smooth. It could happen overnight in a sense, with one fell swoop of up. We're just, let's say the United States, they're bringing on the ideas they brought on the Trump campaign, some of the ideas of Ron Paul. And there's a part of me that thinks they just kind of do that for political selling
Mm.
points and want to get people behind his message or whatnot. Um, but Ron Paul has talked about forever ending the Federal Reserve. And so let's say they take on that initiative and they take on ending the Federal Reserve. Well, what are we backing it with now? What is our currency now? Okay, and let's move into the digital space. Let's secure our finances and our commerce through a digital currency, right? So to me, it seems very clear the actual direction of how it's going to play out, and how our transactions and our lack of traditions just allow us to kind of sit back and passively um, accept the world as it's given to us, right? And it's this adaptation process. It's going to happen without a conscious thought, to because we don't necessarily know, who am I, what are my actual beliefs, right? When we talk about the spirituality without religion, I'm right on board with you in the sense where if you're not asking those deeper moral questions for oneself and actually establishing a framework, a principle of how to live by, well, there's a real, I think, internal spiritual bankruptcy that you're kind of embodying, right? Because you can rationalize a lot of these higher ideals that we were kind of already alluding to fit whatever reality is placed in front of you. But instead of, if you have a more sturdy, rooted approach that comes in the form of many religious traditions, like you were talking about, you can kind of look at the world and say, okay, hold on, this is actually bypassing some of my moral frameworks and ethical foundations. If you don't have that, it, it's easy to get swept along. Easy to just kind of
Mm.
say, oh, okay, this makes sense. Oh, okay, digital identification. Oh, top surveillance of everybody and this and that. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. No problem. And we've already seen that take place. People, they justify the Patriot Act. They justify the mass surveillance, like you were talking with digital tracking on our smartphones. People already know that's taking place. They know the phones listen in and recommend. I've heard everybody say they've had an instance where they say something and then their phone advertises on social media that very same thing they were
Yeah.
talking about, right? So
Yeah.
there's a passive acceptance of a lot of these surveillance measures and the
Yeah.
ominous big brother that's already present.
Yeah.
So, and I think that stems from a lack of a deep spiritual foundation, because if that were to exist and a deeper tradition were to exist within oneself, at least collectively, then none of this would be possible. On an individual level, there's only so much we can do. You know, you and I live with these things and recognize them and are able to sit here and articulate and call them out. But to me, it shows a lack of a collective uh, foundation and a collective ideal. And I don't think you can ever even bring that in from top-down legislation. That's why I've been looking into a lot of voluntarist principles myself and a lot of, decentralized principles. And, all right, how can I directly impact my community and people around me? Maybe have a little freedom cell, if you will, a little freedom zone, as opposed to even trying to uproot the beast system. Because I, at least right now, I don't know how that's possible or if it's possible. You know.
Yeah.
Well, I think
And
another thing I did want to come back to was the idea that, I mean, this could be a good transition. I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned the Virgin Mary, and you kind of alluded to some of the concepts of bringing it about. But do you think you could maybe give a little deeper insight into the story of it, the tradition of it, and how why you feel it's relevant into, as we're talking about this AI governance, I'm going to start using your word, governance. I'm going to start using that one because
yeah.
I think that's the right
Mm.
word.
Mm.
But kind of looking at that tradition and what you're seeing in terms of whether it's parallels or why the story is important now.
Can I just conclude on another point about follow up on what you're saying
Yeah.
about it's also there's an idea associated with the transactionalism that comes from the atomism is of the individual as an atomic ball removed from society, and this is a very dangerous view, and that goes as well with the spiritual, not religious sometimes, and it also goes with the objective of what spiritual evolution is, because a lot of people, when they're talking about their spiritual consciousness now, are talking about sensation, about experience, the spiritual thing, and about how I can manage my life. Now that's important. I'm not saying that that's not an important aspect, but it's not the only aspect. It's also about the other thing. Now to come back to or to elaborate and why I want to put in. I don't focus it too much on the book, but I think it's relevant to our conversation. I want to locate it because we've talked about the perennial traditions and the perennial context, and you see the Divine Mother in all the traditions in some shape or form, and you see it in Hinduism, and of course the Virgin Mary is a classic Western one, and there's a deeper association when we look at it, because in 1900, when Henry Adams came over from the United States, from the famous political family in the United States, he went to a great exhibition and he was fascinated with the dynamos, again,
Mhm.
electricity, and he kind of began to see that we would be worshipping them. We would be regarding them as godlike. And he said, well, what is it replacing? And he said he was at Chartres, the great cathedral, and he had been there, and he was aware of how powerful the image and iconography of the Virgin Mary was, and the worship of the Virgin Mary in Europe. And he said, well, here we have the clash between the Virgin and the dynamo, and that really states it. So, but the Virgin was the end, was coming to an end. That was his perception. So, but we see this juxtaposition. Now, what's curious is what I am arguing is that in all the things associated with the thing and the machine, as I've said already, materialism, metropolitanism, the matrix, when you get down to the grainy detail, it's about a mother figure. It's about this mechanical mother. And at the same time, it's getting rid of the ideas of the mother, the Virgin, and in particular the Virgin Mary. So it really is specific in relation to its effort to create a simulacrum. So when we come to the 1980s, if we take a country like Ireland, which is very Catholic, up to remember the Pope comes to Ireland just at the start in the at the end of the start really of that decade, and there's 1 million people go to see him in a small country in Dublin and other meetings as well. It was very, very Catholic still. And if we go back now, it's a different story. It's been changed really in a generation. At that time, we began to get MTV, Madonna,
Hmm.
the Dominatrix, Virgin Airways, so Virgin Records, Virgin this, Virgin coming in to fly away cheaply to, so we see a deliberate appropriation. You think of Madonna, who's Madonna? Madonna is a pop star. It's
Hmm.
not the Virgin Mary. Virgin is thing that flies me to, etc., etc. This is part of a long stream of creating a simulacrum in a total system. Even cheap, if you look at cheap flights where they came from, the origin is really in the Berlin airlift with Freddie Laker using military planes to transport food and personnel into West Berlin. And it's developed in certain countries and cheap airlines, Southwest in the United States, Ryanair in Europe, they're following on from really what is a military model or a military contextual model. Cheap
Hmm.
travel. How we do? This is globalization. Yeah, you can fly cheaply to some place, spend your money there, and you feel like this is the new world. Again, it came from a context. It didn't come from nowhere. But in this, there's a constant effort to replace the figure that was really a defining figure in Europe. So the Virgin Mary, the reported apparitions, legendary, whatever, start during her lifetime, according to legend, when she's appearing to James going to Spain. And so it's right back at the start of it. So this tradition uh, goes from there right up to the present, and recent famous apparitions or reported apparitions. Now, a lot of people don't believe in these things. A lot of people, and here is the other issue, that there is an approach, a Jungian approach sometimes. It's difficult to say. It's not necessarily Jungian approach, but he says it's in the psyche, and the psyche is real. So like subconscious, collective unconscious, and all that.
Hmm.
But a lot of Jungians don't believe that it's actually out there, that there is a thing, a real apparition of the ontologically real Virgin Mary. That it's it's a projection. It's in subconscious. It's not supernatural. Um, Now, when you come to look at Fatima, for example, 1917, the series of apparitions culminating on October the 13th with the miracle of the sun, witnessed by various figures, say 70,000 people, Freemasons, skeptics, whatever, accept that this thing happened, this miraculous thing, as predicted. Um, Now, they couldn't see the Virgin Mary, but because that was the 3 children that were witnessing, but they told what was going to happen. Now, the evidence of something very, very peculiar happening is overwhelming.
Hmm.
Uh, the only other explanation, and there's plenty of people that believe is associated with UFOs. Now, I don't believe that. I understand why it's a kind of plausible case, but even those are accepting that these phenomena happened. Okay, so there's something there ontologically real. Now, the best argument is that it is what it purports to be. It's the Virgin in that tradition. The a very standard view in the alternative community is that Christ doesn't exist, that Christ didn't exist, it's a made up figure, and of course the Virgin, and they're kind of it doesn't bear scrutiny of the repeated experiences, histories, massive influence of figures like the Virgin Mary. So, in order to disestablish religion, which is the aim of the New World Order, they had to get rid of. They have to certainly get rid of Catholicism, and this is the same in Marxism as articulated by Gramsci. He understood that you had to disestablish Catholicism in order for communism to happen. Because if the peasants, as they were referred to, believed in the supernatural, they wouldn't give up anything for communism. They couldn't be convinced. So they had to attack Catholicism, which was consistent anyway with Marxism, which was consistent also with the kind of capitalist imperialist viewpoint. Because if you look at it from another perspective, if we look at it from Protestant perspective, the Protestant nations of Europe really are no more. Sweden is not a predominantly Protestant nation in any real sense. Neither is Holland. Neither is Britain in any real sense. It's disappearing. It was never meant to be, probably, unfortunately. The ones that will survive in Protestantism are the ones that went against the state, the ones that maintained their tradition, that went against that opposed the state, the Amish or Amish, certain groups and the Mennonite, those ones that were saying, okay, we're doing our thing and we're truly Protestant, if you like, and not beholden to the princes, will persist in this context. So the Virgin Mary is an interesting figure because she's often the figure that distinguishes Protestantism and Catholicism, despite the fact that Luther and Zwingli and all that didn't have a down on the Virgin Mary. Really, they had to say, well, oh, listen, this is a big problem with Catholicism. So there is a canard that's articulated that Catholics worship the Virgin Mary, which is not true. The Virgin Mary was seen as a mediatrix in between, and interesting. So she was the media.
Mm.
She was the way, which is another strange connection. But I mean, it really is persistent. So she's the mediatrix to Jesus and God, in that context. And she's the genetrix, and again with the other things, and the protectress and all that. So Jung, to his credit, when there was a doctrine articulated by the Catholic Church about the Assumption of Mary in 1950, he wrote Answer to Job and explained that this could be a crucial thing because now they're recognizing the feminine in a quaternity. This was his view with the Trinity and the Virgin Mary. That's critical. And he believed that it was, he believed, and the words he uses, that this is necessary to alter the patriarchy. So the patriarchy he was talking about was not this supposed monolithic men system controlling women. It's a spiritual dimension because obviously in the history of Europe, men have equally been oppressed by the system of the thing. It's a wedge that has been articulated, particularly from a left perspective, to attack the existing system and to defeat the family, again, consistent with the New World Order goal. So even in the Virgin Mary also, people say, well, all these apparitions are to support the Catholic Church. More money for the Catholic Church, and say, oh, the Virgin Mary is appearing. But in nearly all of the not in nearly all, in many of the apparitions, the reports from the people that are witnessing the thing involves a message which is critical of the church. She doesn't appear in the central bit. She appears out in the mountains. She appears in the distant place, to children, to people who are not sophisticated. And there's messages that come up in various contexts, like that the priests are on the road, or some of the priests are on the road to perdition and things like that. Contested things, but really there. And there's a controversy about what the secrets of Fatima are, but if people that have really followed these things suggest it was about, an element of what was about an apostasy within the Catholic Church, meaning their rejection within the Catholic Church, not of everyone, but at the top. Now, this was a thing which was predicted by some people on the basis of a takeover of the church. So this is another reason why we have to be careful when we're talking about institutions, that there's battles for institutions. You have it in the United States. This was the tactic to march through the institutions and to take them over. It doesn't mean that the institution is inherently bad. It means at a particular time they're taken over. That's what the true culture, as Gramsci talked about. So the same thing is afoot in relation to the Catholic Church. You see this, it's very specific. In 1970, so what was happening in 1917 at the time of Fatima was the October Revolution in Russia. There's a parallelism. We have this holiness, unholiness appearing right through, and it goes back in the 1840s. There was a series of apparitions with the growth of the revolutionary period, which was associated with fire in the mind, as Billington talked about, the Promethean viewpoint. And the whole implication of these supernatural inputs really was that this ultra-materialism was an attack on the human, and it mirrored the passion of Christ, and that the tools used again in some of the apparitions, the implication is the tools used against Christ, the hammer and the nail, would be used against the people. It was a reflection of what was going to happen. And yet then we get the hammer and the sickle in the Soviet Union. It's a quite remarkable. It was anticipated in some of these things, and there's talk about the Antichrist and all that. And my reading of the ideas of the Antichrist is there's a I differ from a lot of the Protestant views, etc. I think it's about a system which is anti-Christian. And to me, it's about a lot of it is about the technological system, that we could map some of the statements onto the description of the technological system. So the attack on, for example, when the Notre Dame burned, Our Lady, the Notre Dame in Paris, there was famous tweets here of people celebrating, well-known public people saying, "Oh, at last," etc. The hatred against these things is remarkable. You know that the great Chartres Cathedral, the Allies were going to bomb it. They said there was Nazis in it because they did this throughout the war. They were destroying Catholic places, and one general went in to see whether it was true, or I think it was a general, and he saved it from being bombed. There has been an effort to erase, to deface, and this happened in the Reformation, of course, and that was one of the reasons why the Virgin Mary didn't, this respect of the Virgin Mary didn't continue, because in England, in particular, there was a huge cult of the Virgin Mary. So when you come to the Reformation, what are they doing? They're taking all the stuff off out of the monasteries, various good books on that, the stripping of the altars, the dissolution of the monasteries. And then you couldn't read, when you were defacing, and that was the word they used, to deface, when you're taking away all the images of Mary and the saints and all that kind of stuff, it was a bit more, it was easier to say, well, you shouldn't be worshipping these figures, despite the culture. Now, if you look at Renaissance art, the Virgin Mary is critical. Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, all the great artists were reproducing these images. For example, it was critical to the influence of art. And if you look at books like The Science of Art, for example, and you begin to understand how perspective, mathematics, etc., grew out of art and grew out of these engagements with the image, and in particular religious iconography, which led to an input into technology. And if you look at more recent respectful books, say, for example, on the relationship between religion and science, they're getting more aware that religion was the driving force behind science. And particular things, the Islam and Judaism are distinct from Catholicism and Protestantism goes actually closer to Islam and Judaism in relation to the representation of sacred figures, so that therefore you don't have in Islam this representation of the human figure and sacred figures. and there's a similarity in Judaism, although it was different early on in Islam, for example, and there's exceptions in Judaism. So you had this fascination with the figure, which gives us the elements that led to the articulation of the theories of human dignity, Mirandolo, all this in the Renaissance, the idea of what human dignity meant, as well as ideas of community and values, certain values associated with that, which was critical in European society. It was absolutely crucial in relation to the development of society and the development of values. So there is a supernatural dimension to this. The supernatural there's a warning that comes up in most of the Marian things about a cataclysm or destruction that will happen, darkness that will befall the earth associated with our behavior. It's not a punishment, it's a description of what's going to happen. You see that in Akita, the nun who the Virgin Mary appeared to in Japan, for example, re-articulated some of the things associated with these disasters that can happen. And in Garabandal, which is not an approved apparition in Spain, I met one of the women to whom the Virgin Mary appeared on hundreds of times, but there is a description of a great event that will happen, which involves people being exposed as in a near-death experience to their life. There's all these interesting supernatural dimensions. But let me say, just for the record, I believe that the Virgin Mary is an ontologically real figure. Let me be open about that. Mm-hmm. As I believe as well, or would attest to, the existence of beings like fairies on a much lower level, all the things that people are interested in. These great figures exist too. Prometheus doesn't exist on the spiritual domain. There is no Prometheus on the this is a literary figure, never appears to anyone, not ontologically real spiritually. The Virgin Mary is different, so I also get a bit confused about people who talk about these spiritual realities and are obsessed with beings at the lower level, elves and mechanical elves and all these things. And they tell you as well, what they're saying now is that when they're trying to increase the doses people can take so they can see the mechanical elf. Mm-hmm. And the scientists doing so explain that they believe that people are being possessed by these during the process. Now, that's not a thing I recommend to anyone to be possessed. It's about maintaining your independence and aligning with higher orders. But there's this fascination with sensation is leading people to go into a domain which is predictable, which is reproducible, which is not open, which is defined, where they have some sensation of experience, independently of any possible moral context that can exist around them, irrespective of the great traditions that informed the cultural cooperation, evolution of European, Western, and beyond thinking about some of these issues. Our Lady of Guadalupe is a huge influence in relation to Mexico and that. So it's not just here, and we can see present Indonesia, the Philippines, the power of this figure. So in Genesis, one interpretation of Genesis is about the woman and the snake is that's the Virgin Mary, that the Virgin Mary is the one that triumphs ultimately over the snake. And the snake, in many senses, is a symbol of the technological, unified scientific scientism, empire of scientism. It's recurrent. It's evident in the work of people like Moncure Conway, who wrote books on demonology and secular humanism, and was interested in Thomas Paine. And he sees the serpent figure as a kind of as a scientific, as something scientific. And the serpent was used to describe organization, links between people. It was implicit in the Benjamin Franklin image. I believe that what is this serpent? It's a manifestation, a motif, a representation, a symbol of these unified corporate forces that traverse the globe, that are united by control systems, that represent the military industrial complex, that include the underworld, that use the underworld, that use the criminal elements as well, and are unified. And what we have is a representation of the sacred divine feminine opposed to this thing. And I believe that's what the story is. And that's actually the story when you look at it from their perspective, because they keep on using this language, keep on addressing this issue, keep on wanting to focus their attention on the remove. They have to remove the Virgin Mary to destroy not just Western civilization but global civilization, because they don't see other. They've always seen Catholicism as the major impediment. They believe they can deal with Islam because it's not centralized. They believe that, and I think they believe they can do it Judaism. And the last point in defense of religion, I keep getting comments or seeing people commenting saying about, oh, you know what I mean, about the you're too easy on the Jews and Judaism, and there's a lot of genuine anti-Semitism in that. Unfortunately, for those simplistic views, um, I've read the literature on the stuff, and when people are making bigoted remarks about a class of people, no matter who they are, whether they're gay people or Irish people or Catholic people or United States, you cannot do that. So people fail to distinguish between a whole range of different categories of people. Uh, for example, when you're talking about Zionism, the spiritual Zionism, and there's nationalistic Zionism, militaristic Zionism. The Rastafarians are Zionist in some way. William Blake was Zionist. You have to distinguish between different categories. Within the Zionists, there was different categories of, of groups of people. They make all these things. Then you have the groups like the Israelites, which again enclose a range of people, sometimes Jewish, sometimes not. You have the British Israelites, which are, I believe, very influential in all the political things, but they're not Jewish. You have within Judaism the people that, if you like, are ethnically Jewish and religiously Jewish, and they're often talking about non-religious Jewish people. And then they keep on talking about the Sabbateans and the Frankists, who are they were apostates. They rejected Judaism. So they were people who stood for everything which wasn't. So people are confusing different things. The same in relation to Catholicism, or and Islam as well. There's different. There's no nuance in these things. People really have to get focused. I've explained what my view is on this thing, the origin of this thing. I've located it, going back to France in particular, and Rome, and go back before that, but come up through the princely power in Europe, particularly with the Plantagenets, particularly with the Normans, particularly with the British Empire, as really taken over by the House of Orange, which goes back to France as well, near where the Pope was in Avignon, when he was in exile, which is manifesting and grew up through the colonization process in the English-speaking world in the United States, Australia, Canada. It's the same system. Now that can include different people in a cosmopolitan system. That's what empires do. In fact, it has no allegiance to Britain and no allegiance to England, Wales, Scotland, any of that. It will destroy all the people, as it will eventually destroy the United States if it continues in this process. It has no allegiance to any. It doesn't love anything but that dream that manifests. None of these people, they don't believe in the nation state. They don't believe in the family, and they don't believe in religion. And if you look at Samuel Huntington from a US perspective, he's talking about the people that go to Davos, And he said, these people, there's a class of people now coming from the United States and other places, and an elite class. And he said they have no souls. That's the way he articulated. They don't have any souls. They have allegiance to nobody, only to this dream of power. The other, the opposition to that is in the spiritual traditions, whatever way. Now, again, I'm not saying there's only one way of seeing it, because these things exist in the different traditions. Taoism, for example, in many senses, anticipates the Virgin Mary. Some people believe, when they translate it in the 1700s, they believe this was an anticipation of the Virgin Mary. I don't know if you saw 2 weeks ago or so, there was this supposed disclosure of a secret UFO program
Hmm.
in the United States. I don't know if you saw that. It was
I don't,
called,
last couple of weeks, I
yeah,
don't think I did.
yeah. The name of it was the Immaculate Constellation. When it was reported on Joe Rogan, for example, I think it was Schellenberger, he mistakenly was saying the Immaculate Conception.
Mm.
Do you see, again, the deliberate parallelism of creating a substitute to draw on the archetypal thing which is there? Because the Immaculate Conception is associated with the Virgin Mary. Immaculate is a word. And what is the Immaculate? It means without spot, if you like,
Mm.
without dust, we might say. So this concept is it's another appropriation. So what I've been saying to people is, you can see the indicia, you can predict what they're doing in some ways by looking at these things. And there was an example. I talked with my friend Sang Chin on Taoism about this concept of the immaculate thing, and then a week after, this immaculate thing came out as a secret thing. It's
Mm.
predictable. It's a deep attempt to appropriate, and of course, all this UFO stuff. It's what H.G. Wells wrote, War of the Worlds.
Hmm.
Invasion. Oh yeah, we need to join together. You need to get the implant to protect you against the aliens. Come on, give us a break, will you? So I mean, really, and in all the traditions, going back to John Dee, the Navy are the ones that are behind the intelligence things. It's the Navy, naval intelligence. Go up to Ian Fleming, James Bond, Navy. So the Navy now are the ones that are disclosing this. Why don't they disclose about all the people, coming across the border or something?
Hmm.
There's a program that the United States have exercised called the the screw worm prevention thing in the Darien Gap, so they can stop these parasites coming, by spraying stuff, again, dust and all, crop spraying. Uh, at the same time, there's millions of people coming through there. There's no, they can't. It's unbelievable. I mean, seriously, if you think that this is not planned, if you think, and it's happening in all the countries. Ireland has been radically transformed since I went. Now, and again, I'm a pragmatist.
Hmm.
I'm just describing what is there. Whatever will emerge can never be what has been there before. It's changed irradicably. It will be if you look at all the demographics. And people say, no, it's not true and all that. And, if you look at it objectively, it is. That's the objective.
Hmm.
Dislocation. And the same thing is happening in relation to the human, the environment, and their psyche. And then when you get some theories which say, well, you don't exist, Evan, there's no self, and all this kind of, they can be dangerous when they're wielded improperly, or they're intended as propaganda for other systems.
Right.
So that's the kind of outline of how I think the Virgin Mary. I don't have any problem. I don't have any problem in standing by that now. I before, I didn't think it was so important,
Hmm.
and people say, and they could say it wouldn't be true, but they could say, "Oh, that's just because you're Catholic and all that." I've been very critical of the church, the institutions, even looking at some of the apparitions and that. And people also saying the alternative community, well, you know what I mean. If you're religious. You're not objective. They
Mm.
say, well, if you're born in a particular thing, you're obviously not objective if you can't leave it behind. That's like saying to someone who's talking on a podcast in English that, because you're born as an English speaker, you should switch to Chinese or something.
Right.
It's an absurd position, and I don't care about that. And not only that, I believe that the traditional approaches in Buddhism, in Judaism, Islam, in Hinduism, in the real in indigenous theology as well, that they have very important insights in them that have been perfected over the time. Even there's plenty of books now about, oh, well, the Buddha didn't exist, etc. Same stuff. Even if the Buddha didn't exist, you have all these practices that came from other people that are unknown since.
Mhm.
Orson Welles went to Chartres in the film F is for Fake, and he stands before a famous image of Chartres Cathedral and said, "This is the greatest work of art in humanity has ever made." And he said, the interesting thing about this work of art is we don't know who the makers are. That it was the community did. We don't know. It's not associated with particular individuals. And you have that other dimension which we can talk about the great input. But the traditions are important. And when you come down, if you take all them off the agenda, move them aside, and we have a new problem like euthanasia, okay? And euthanasia is coming apace from places like Switzerland and that. You can go and get euthanized if you want in
Mhm.
Switzerland. I'm not criticizing people that do. I'm just saying it's interesting. So now you have in Canada to say, oh well, listen, I mean, you're poor, you're disabled. Have you considered euthanasia? In future, we may have the system itself saying, listen, uh, good news and bad news. Good news, the computer has independently selected you for euthanasia. Yeah, yeah. Or bad news, and the good news, well, we can do it today.
Right.
But I mean, it's a serious issue. And the same thing, I'm hearing people saying, oh, well, from a humanist tradition, there's these poor people that want to die, and we have to help them. It's always the same. It's a tin edge of the way. And you say, what again, the difficulty of identifying what life is, but then the other issue, what is the nature of human life? Does a human life have dignity? What does that mean? What is a human person? These are critical things that traditions have explained, and there are even nuances even then. I've talked about Steiner and his emphasis on the significance of Golgotha and his belief that it was the most important event in human history. And I do think, and I have argued, that there's something very important and unique in the story of Jesus and the Virgin Mary about the human and about the human now and the future. Because everything, the singularity, is about the end of Christianity. It's about putting an end to Christianity. So.
Mhm. What I was going to say, yeah, it's interesting because there's so many different points that you made that tie into a lot of what we've already talked about. And, I really resonated with, we're looking at the Virgin Mary, right? And you use that word mediatrix and
Mm,
media, right? And what's the role
mm,
of media? It's like the role of a messenger, right? Or it's the role of a relayer of information. And what is information? Information is
mm.
what dictates perception, and perception is what dictates reality, right? So the role
Yes.
of media, in a sense, is the conveyor of reality. And if we're looking at the role of, in the Virgin Mary
Mm.
sense, that would be
Yeah.
what she's doing. And, I kind of kept coming back to the idea of what is the, if we're talking about like archetypal ideas, like what is the archetype of the Virgin in itself? There's a level of purity, there's a level of innocence. Uh, there's a true fundamental, I'd say, nature of who we are that lives within that archetypal idea. And to me, if you're, let's say with the destruction of and desecration of the Virgin Mary, and let's say the Virgin archetype as a whole, well, it's in to me, it really parallels a lot of what we're seeing in society with the destruction of innocence, whether that's through
Hmm.
trauma, a disconnect from our
Good
roots,
point. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, playing into fear-based mindsets. I think innocence is something, there's a big reason we see in particular healing and spiritual communities is coming back to the inner child and coming back to that part of the self because there's a level of innocence that we've all become really, I'd say forgotten more in a sense. I don't know if we're ever truly disconnected from it. We've just more forget it. And so with the role of, if we're destroying the Virgin Mary, we're destroying our own innocence, we're destroying our own purity, sort of the harmony that really fundamentally brings us together and unites us. Because, once you destroy that innocence and you kind of destroy your own, uh, I would say, willingness to perceive beauty, right? It's from that space of innocence and from that space of purity that you can have a recognition of the divine mother, of the beauty of this world. I'd say the divine mother is the creator of beauty, right? And that it gives birth to life, which in itself holds beauty. And so, you can go out into the world and sit by a river and under the sun. And what's beautiful about it is there's life to it, right? There's a liveliness in the river. There's a liveliness in the wind. There's a true essence of life and purity that you can feel in the presence of nature, right? And so I think that desecration of the Virgin Mary that you're talking about, to me, it really parallels that desecration of innocence in itself and innocence and really the corruption, I would say, of the human soul. Because if you look at the media and what they relay and the reality that they portray, it's so, whether it's in our music or our movies, it's so emphasized in violence and there's I'd say a weaponization of sex and drugs, all of these different areas that really kind of corrupt our minds into seeking. You were talking about sensation and the seeking of sensation and pleasure and really hedonism in a lot of ways. I would really say that fuels mainstream contemporary society in the forms of entertainment that we have, and the way that we go through life. It's very difficult to you have to really make it a conscious intent to want to see the beauty and want to see the innocence in the person that's sitting across from you, especially if that person isn't seeing those things in yourself, right? And they're very much caught in that same perceptual framework that the rest of the culture is. So to me, it feels like a natural desecration of that beauty, of that mother, of that divine uh, beauty that is omnipresent, that it's all around us. But we have to have our perception warped and destroy the stories, destroy the traditions. If somebody who is, it actually makes me really want to go and study the story of the Virgin Mary and really connect with that figure, because I don't come from a particular religious background. I mean, we were able to, we have a genealogy book. My brother has it at the moment, but we were able to trace back to where our ancestors came from, like a small village in Ireland. I'll have to find out what it was. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I'll have to find out and then send it to you, because yeah, surely you'll know more about it than I would, at least the village. But we came from an Irish Catholic background, and so even within my own roots and in my own ancestry, those stories are very present, right? And so if we can kind of return to those traditions, can allow a deeper connection to these universal and archetypal forces that are all around us and are present within us, and actually kind of regain that, and in the process regain a sense of sovereignty, which I think is so, that's the point of this whole system, is to destroy the individual sovereignty, to destroy and corrupt the soul. So I don't know, it just feels like a very natural, well, I guess not natural, is that, maybe that's not the right word, but the world that they are creating is, what I see is so parallel to what you just said with the desecration of the Virgin Mary. And I would agree with you in that it is important in that context. Because I don't know of personally, I'm sure they exist in other traditions, but I don't know of other figures that necessarily embody that same role of the Divine Mother or of that sort of figure in what she represents.
Um, well, there is a universality about and this is what people would say in deconstructing it, of the Virgin, of the Mother figure that's in. You can see it in Hinduism. There's loads of examples, sort of what and again associated with water. And there's loads in the East in indigenous philosophy, but there is a distinctiveness about this element in relation to its association, again, with a very coherent doctrine, which is, and a very systematic interventionist approach in an ontologically real sense, which is different. And in the portrait of the artist as a young man, James Joyce is he's kind of rejecting his religion, his Catholicism, and one of the friends or the character representing him, and one of his friends says, "So are you going to become a Protestant?" He says, I'm not going to not believe in something that's logic and coherent for something that's illogical and
Mm. He's he's
incoherent."
he's actually in my bloodline, James Joyce. He's a
Yeah.
relative, distant
Well, it's
relative.
funny on the I think the McDermott clan, if I'm not mistaken, are associated with another area in Ireland which has an intense connection with UFOs and magic. So I mean,
No
it's not
surprise
off the
then.
ground. It's not off the ground you licked it. But anyway, the so to come back, it was good. That was a good. I agree with that. I think you articulated that well. Um, I know you're interested in the tarot. Have
Mhm.
you read Valentine Thunberg on meditations on the tarot?
I have not, but I'm going to write that down because
Well,
I
you
would.
have to read that.
Valentine.
So yeah,
What
because
was what was their last name?
uh,
Valentine.
it's Valentine Thunberg, and it's meditations on the tarot,
Okay.
and it's a deep Christian hermetic analysis, a serious book on the tarot. There's other ones by Hedderman, an Irish monk actually on it, but this is an important one to read and to connect to some of these deeper elements in Christianity, because some strange reason, again, part of the selling process is to say these things are not there in Christianity, which is not true. Uh,
Mm.
if you define Christianity in a narrow sense, associate with a package that were projected by the estate, princely authorities, you could come to that conclusion, but it's not true in relation to the tradition. Yeah, so that's a book I think that someone in your position should add to
Mhm.
your extending repertoire. So the other association again, and you indicated this, was the purity, which is also, there's an environmental imperative in it. So the Virgin Mary was easy for the early Christians. There's this story that everywhere that Christianity was beaten, murdered, it's not true in relation to Ireland, certainly. And so if you have the story of say the Annunciation and the angel coming and Christ being implanted, if you like, and that story. It's the exact same as what happens in Newgrange. That was the story, in my view. And I've been in Newgrange. I've been there the 21st day of December and noticed the proximity to Christmas.
Mm.
And what happens is the sun shines from extreme point on the horizon into the center of this mound. The mound is obviously the womb. It's dark, and the year is reborn in it. So if you're explaining the Virgin Mary story, it's utterly consistent. In fact, anticipated by some of these things. And of course, the mother is the earth, and this was the story the Son, God, the Father, and the earth uniting through light, and giving birth, hope, all the things associated with the birth and the incarnation. So again, it's a deeply embedded story, but the purity is manifest in relation to the, say, water is associated with the Virgin Mary. So you have Lourdes, you have a spring, it's healing. The spring emerges, it's a critical part of the story. Yeah, similarly, there's a equivalence in La Salette. There's also the tears appearing in Akita. So in that, I believe, is an environmental ethic about the purity of water. If
Mm.
we abandoned all these scientific things and said, look, what we'll do is purely focus on not polluting the water systems, and then clean air, clean whatever, you would begin to remove the causes of pollution and destruction, if that was an ethic. And there's there's loads of holy wells around Ireland which were dedicated to the Virgin Mary, which took on and combined with the existing pagan worship of the earth. There's no problem, they're still there.
Mhm.
The only thing that will disturb them is now this contemporary generation, because of their deliberate mechanistic hostility towards the symbols associated with that. And they will destroy something that the early pagans had no problems with.
Mm.
And they will do it in the name of modern paganism, which is an utter lie, because that was not what the history. There was no problem. They recognized this figure. So she's also associated with the mountains, and hence there's an association with Montana. I know you've been there, so I haven't been there, but I'll come back to that connection. When you're talking about innocence, it's interesting, and that's exactly right. That's exactly right, because you see this. You see this with you can see it before your eyes in the media if you're looking at it in relation to P. Diddy and Justin Bieber and all this kind of. It's there in front of you. Don't go on to me about what happened, 100 years ago, when you can't look at this stuff and not you, Bert.
Yeah.
It's right in front of your eyes, shown in your face, the destruction of innocence by these systems. It's deliberate, systematic, institutional, and associate with the intelligence service as well. I mean, that's the frightening thing. I'm not saying that particular case, but that type of activity. They did the same thing in Northern Ireland, same thing in Britain, extortion, criminal. It's utterly consistent. And the music industry was rampant with it. So when I hear these figures, bleeding before our eyes with their pain when they're associated with all these things. It really beginning to get on me goated at this stage. But yeah, that the destruction of innocence is part of it. At the same time, if we go back to the Tao Te Ching, we're told, and this is the counterintuitive thing that people don't understand. A classic principle is that softness overcomes hardness.
Mm.
So ultimately, although we see that the model, the Virgin Mary, is of the power of the soft and gentle. And I saw this myself in doing a bit of judo. Judo is the gentle way. So what you're doing is learning to use minimum force for maximum results by utilizing and imbalancing the person or using their movement against them. And but it's gentle in relation to its effort in the context. There's a lot to be learned from that, but this is a classic insight from the mechanics of the operation of the world in this that they observed from water. Um, Again, apparitions in places away from the center. There's another negative association in a way with the word innocent. Not negative, but a nuance.
Mhm.
Um, my father was, although he's from a Republican background, he was also in the RAF, and so he met all the different hard groups. Um, and he used to say, and I said, "How did you?" I remember saying as a kid, "How did you find the American soldiers?" He said, "They were very innocent." He said, "Americans are very innocent," and it was a kind of surprising thing, but he meant in a kind of naive way.
Mm.
He meant there was a naiveness there. Now, and there's a truth in that. You see it and the British always taught this, even when during the Second World War, irrespective of the fact that they knew the American system worked, they taught it about the individuals that they were naive in many senses. Although, of course, the British go over after Pearl Harbor, and Winston Churchill is in the White House for 3 weeks when they decide on the future of the world. This is where a lot of the New World Order came after Pearl Harbor in the White House, describes the whole system that was going to come after the war. Uh, Out of that come State of Israel, etc., and all that Atlantis is thing. It all comes from there. It doesn't come from anywhere else. Part of the whole system. Um, so that innocence is another interesting little twist on the thing. So there is a passage, or there's a line in the passage in I think it's prophecies of Isaiah in the Bible, which talks about the future when the wolf and the sheep come together and all this sort of difference. But still, the serpent is left, and the serpent shall have dust as their meat. So the connection between the serpent and the dust continues in some sense. These are the curious symbologies that apply and recur in the context. Um, I'll come back on Montana in a second. Sorry, have you any
Um, well, it's fascinating to me because I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying, and you're kind of connecting a lot of dots for me on it. Um, but I mean, I'm curious to hear how the Montana connection kind of plays into it because I've spent some time there, and
yeah.
I do look at sort of Americans in general, and there is a great like I guess naiveness is the right word because people are generally, there sometimes you get a reputation of America around the world for being kind of cold or
Mm,
uh jerks or
mm,
kind of assholes and
mm,
disrespectful of culture
mm.
but at the same time, I think a lot of people they're just living their lives. They're very like
Yeah, yeah,
bought
yeah.
into the system. They're very um
Trusting.
trusting. There
Yeah,
is a
yeah,
deep level
yeah.
of trust in
Mm,
community, I would say, even within what's interesting is because uh I've been to probably 40 plus states at this point, which is, pretty well traveled within the country.
mm,
And it's interesting because, it's very easy, let's say you're in Europe, to kind of travel all around and see the different
mm,
countries. I view America in the same sense. It's where like you could in theory break up the whole federal government in a way, and each state could kind of be its own country because they all do have their own unique cultures. They all do
mm,
have their own unique perspectives and ideas and ways of living. But there is this sort of general, um, I don't want to say passiveness. I don't know if that's the right word, but definitely a naiveness to sort of the whole global, uh, I'd say domination that's taking place and what's actually going on. People are very just kind of bought into their culture. They're bought into the community. There's being in a small town in South Dakota, 2,500 people, you go to, I go to four different places. I'm going to run into the same person at least in two of those places, right? Everybody knows each other. There's a deep level of trust and community, and it has its gossip, of course, and its bickering and all of that. But there's a deep, I feel like there's a deep sense of trust. And when you first meet somebody here, you go into a big city, you're not necessarily saying hello to everybody. It's kind of I view the cities here as sort of there's an inversion of that American culture that's taking place within the greater metropolitan areas. And as we're starting to see more of a flood of migration, across the southern border, certainly. But there is definitely a level of naiveness that I actually think is kind of beautiful. And there is an innocence and a level of seeing another person as a human being that I really like about this country. And I think in the state I'm in, South Dakota, and in Montana as well. And I spent 2 years out there. That's definitely present more so than, I lived in Boston for 6 years. It's very, if anything, when I visited, the only place I've been to in Europe was Paris. I'm like, it's kind of a similar culture, to be honest with you, in the big metropolitan area like Boston as it is, let's say Paris, and how people converse and, trade and, how people kind of go about their day to day. There's definitely more of a simplistic uh, American culture that exists in more of the rural communities that make up most of the country. People seem to forget that most of America is these small towns and is the ruralness, is the living on the countryside, is kind of more in touch with the land actually. But the major cities make up half the population, even if they're only 10% of the actual geographical area. But um, I definitely agree with you in the assertion of naiveness, and I think you can kind of
Mm.
see it in just in the way people interact and the way they go about and kind of build community.
Let me rapidly say that I agree with you on that. My experiences have been very positive in the United States. I like that. I've always energized from that, and that is an aspect of openness because in a culture where people come from different cultures, they had to do that, and they
Hmm.
had to unite, and they had to do that. So I mean, remarkable. I mean, I arrived when I went to Boston. The place I wanted to see was Harvard because
Hmm.
I was teaching law I was curious about Harvard and the context, and again, get a picture of it. It's very, very important in a number of contexts. And I went up to the gate, and there was a policeman there, and I said, "Excuse me." He was a big, tall guy with a gun, so I said, "Excuse me, sir," as you do to anyone with a gun. Uh, I said, "Can you tell me the way to the law faculty?" And he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, I teach law, and where do you come from?" "Come from Maryland." Uh, "What's your name?" And I said, "James Tunney." "Anything to box of Gene Tunney?" And I said, "Yeah, he's a relation of mine, he's Christian." He said, "Oh, come with me." And and he I met Archibald Cox, the guy that prosecuted Richard Nixon.
Mm,
Um, and after he was finished on his duty, we went around. He rang his wife and said, "Going to be home late," and we went around the pubs and talked about it. He had Irish connection, but I
mm,
mean, it was quite remarkable and really really nice and unusual level of just and strangely, there's another. There's another I was in the. This is ridiculous. Um, I was in the west of Ireland, and I didn't live in Ireland at the time.
yeah.
And the guy said, "Oh, you were over in Boston, yeah, yeah." And there's a Boston police, few Boston police women come back. I said you might be in tonight. I said, "Okay, I'll come back and just be." And so I came back, and he said, "This is such and such." And she said, "Oh, I know. I have your name." And this because the guy said, "If you're going over, it's ridiculous." It was the
Mm,
village applied on the, but very, very, very nice context. Really, really, yeah, just nice,
mm,
trusting, and again a different perspective on how things work. About that, so I like that. I've always enjoyed that. The last time I was there, I thought it was a bit more tense than before,
mm,
and I didn't get the same sense. And I was up. There was an interesting element to that. Well, I was up at where NORAD is in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, and that, and I said, I had in my head that I was going to talk to the first person that I saw with a Trump hat on because the phenomenon, I couldn't say I knew about the phenomenon really until,
mm,
now I didn't have any of the prejudices about, but I wanted as just say, so I saw an old couple and I went, so I went over to them. We got on great and had a great conversation. And it was really, again, the same thing, just, nice and open. Um, but what was funny was there was only one group he picked out as, the real behind all the bad things,
mm.
after all that. So, I mean, I was agreeing with everything. And I get a book there about possession, funny enough, that I knew the book. And I said, "Oh, that's an interesting book." So you had one group that was the real that was behind all stuff, and what was that? It was the Catholics. So I mean that was what I was saying. Oh, I didn't say I was, but so I was kind of saying that's interesting. And
Mm,
this is the way the divisions are created by, you know what I mean, and why it's important to have nuance in that. But I was saying about Montana. Um, uh, I've studied most of the Marian apparitions, so I have some sense. I'm not saying there's not in my psyche a predisposition or an awareness. You can't do that. If we start talking about Buddhism or whatever like that, and these things can enter into your psyche. But there's different levels of dreams. This is the thing that I think people make a mistake on in relation to dreams. They talk about lucid dreams and they confuse them with different dreams. In the indigenous philosophy, if you take their example, they believe that when you see certain people in your dreams, that they are visiting you. Anything, it's not anything imagined. It's not from
Hmm.
your psyche. It's a platform of connection. And I believe that there is an ontologically a different type of dream. Now, I don't really care whether anyone doesn't believe that, and I
Hmm.
certainly don't care if they don't believe my explanation of things. Um, but to cut a long story short, I did have a dream. It was a strange dream, and in the next room was the Virgin Mary. So she wasn't meant to be the center, but there was a there was a boy, a kind of teenager, was sent, if you like, from the
Hmm.
Virgin Mary. So this context appeared when I'm in my bed. I'm asleep, of course, it's a dream. But in the dream, again, lucid is not the correct term. This is a spiritual dream.
Yep.
So in such a dream, you should be, or in my understanding of this type of dream, you're aware of everything going on. So people might describe it as lucid. So you are yourself in the context. So what it seemed to be was that the room where I was is exactly what it was, but it was bathed in a silver light. It was as if you were seeing slightly through a veil, or it was slightly dimmed. But as you were seeing with your eyes open, and in a position I would be if I was in the bed, say like in a hospital bed, if you like.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm quite stoic. I'm not into all this kind of over emotional stuff. It's not something where I came from. I don't believe, and I don't think it's useful. I don't think this sensation of emotion is a mature thing. I don't think it's a way forward. I'm sick of hearing people going on about that. So, um, and as a result of that, sometimes you may not not be as preoccupied with things that in some ways you are preoccupied with, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Um, so in this context, I was obviously thinking about someone in a concerned way, but I wasn't thinking in a conscious way because I believe that you have to get on and you just have to get on with stuff and you have
Yep.
to be, so because people can be like a hippopotamus and bathe in the mud of their despair. And I don't approve of that. So anyway, I'm trying to explain a psychological or context to it. So in the dream, this young fella came around and sat down on the bed as you would in a kind of hospital bed, and um, said, "I have something for you." So I looked to his hands for I expect, and he said, "I have something from Our Lady of Montana." That was the curious thing.
Mm.
Um, so. I'll get locked up for telling you this. That guy's really gone over but I mean, um, so, and then there was nothing in his hands, but he gave me a hug.
Mm.
Yeah, that was the thing. So that was the dream. It was a very nice dream. It was a very real dream, and it was a very spiritual dream. Okay.
Yeah.
So Lady of Montana. So then, now obviously I have again an awareness of all the major kind of things associated with the Virgin Mary in some shape or form. Some are more distant at different times. Um, so I said, "Oh, Lady of Montana, what's that about?" I mean, there's a problem already because, in some sense, the Garabandal, which I have been to, I'm very interested in Spain, is in the Montañas area. So the word mountain, Montana,
Hmm.
is associated with loads of apparitions.
Yeah.
So it is in many ways a thematic recurrence of apparitions of, Our Lady of the Mountains or the mountainous region. So you might say, well, it's a general thing. And that's possibly a an element of it. Um, but so then I was thinking, well, who is this little fella? And he was quite distinctive. So and it seemed to be associated with. I have been very interested in La Salette, and the there's a boy, Maximine is one of there was a boy and a girl, but Maximine was the boy. Now, if you read Wikipedia, there's a little hatchet chop on this guy, so it's not representative
Hmm.
of the evidence, which I've plowed to whatever sources I can get in French and in the patois. And this guy saw the Virgin Mary and never deviated from his story, despite there's a few little things in it. And if you read in a lot of the sources, they say, we tried to commercially exploit it. I understand the context of it, but he never deviated. He rejected loads of money through his life. He didn't get many benefits. He was hounded throughout his life to tell the story again. And when we visited that place up in the mountains, it's very high in the Alps. Uh, we were in a tent, and actually, when we put up the tent, curious little connection. The little tent yard, the public tent place where you put up a tent, is right beside a graveyard where he is.
Mm.
It was just a curious little connection, which is not up where the apparition site. It's in the local village. So I mean, that fella could be a candidate because he's really about the age and the thing. But the one that I thought it was, the representation, was this figure from Montana. Now, there's a couple of apparitions there's a number of connections between the Virgin Mary and Montana. The most recent connection is when they built the Our Lady of the Rockies,
Hmm.
which is an interesting story on its own in Butte. So they set up because this gentleman his wife was dying, and he prays to the Virgin Mary, and she doesn't die. So he said he would build a statue if she survived. That was the kind of promise. This is another aspect of the Marian worship, the Marian tradition.
Hmm.
So um, and there's different words for worship in Latin that distinguishes better than the English language, the worship to God, and a different type of adoration, and there's different Latin concepts if one is being technical about it. But so they built this statue, which I think is the fourth biggest statue in the United States.
Hmm. If you
The
drive through
community built,
through Butte, you can see it like up in
yeah,
the
right.
yeah.
There's a documentary about it when they got the federal, they got the army to help with helicopters to bring up the pieces. So they pressure up, but they did it through a voluntary process, and they built that out of gratitude to the supernatural, obviously utilizing their religious sense or spiritual sense for some goal that's not immediately beneficial to any of the individuals. And here's the curiosity. Here they talk about Gesamtkunstwerk in relation to cathedrals that they're community built,
Hmm.
like Wells was talking about Shard. So here we have people doing something which is out of the ordinary, extraordinary, voluntarily. And this is another element. This gets at the problem with the theory of evolution, the difficulties with concepts of altruism. I'll come back to that in a second, the altruism bit. That doesn't make sense that people do something like this. But inspired by a supernatural force, they can do that, which serves as all the good things you talked about, community, but it
Yeah.
manifests itself and it brings people's attention to some other value, and it sustains. So you have this positive loop that comes from these positive values. This is the spiraling effect that you get. But the earlier apparitions was the name escapes me. It may be Stevensville. It's a bit more to Stevensville. Maybe it's a bit more to the west,
Hmm.
and it's a valley. And there was one or two apparitions, and they were to the Native American uh, uh, tribes. It was associated with the uh, the Jesuits had set up posts there. But in one of what's very interesting, in one of the apparitions, I don't think this is an approved one by the church, but I mean, there's plenty of evidence about it. According to the story, there was, well, there was a story of one Indian girl who converted and told the people to convert because she had a sense of the Virgin Mary before she died young. And there was another chap who did die young as well. I think his name was Little Paul, he was called. And according to the story, he converts to Catholicism, but he's unable to say the prayers. He cannot articulate or cannot learn them. So according to the story, he gets this vision of the apparition of the beautiful lady. And as a result, all of a sudden, he can say his prayers and it becomes regarded as, and there's a church there, etc. So I find this, so that's the individual conception I would identify. I can see an image of the chap. But there's also another connection that this is a neglected aspect. You see it in relation to cities and the Hindu conceptions, or you see it in relation to spiritual gifts. That it's a very odd thing. In some other context, it's called the cosmic classroom. It's an idea that you can learn. Now, of course, we can learn things subliminally when we're asleep, according to some people.
Hmm.
But this conception is that you actually learn things from the universe, from God, from the higher realms. Ramujan, the Indian mathematician, Ramanjuan,
Hmm.
uh, he came up with he was given the most complex mathematical theories from the local goddess that they did worship in India. So some of the most complex um, mathematics about black holes, he was given them. He didn't work them out.
Hmm.
They were given to him. He saw them. So this is another example of this literal input, this noetic input. In this story, we have this infused knowledge. It's a testament to the possibility of supernaturally infused knowledge. This is what the kind of story is also pointing to. This phenomenon exists that people, it's difficult for people to understand, but in spiritual terms, once they go on a certain point, they are, and again, like the quality of the naive or the innocent, they are open to learning and they can learn on a different level. It's a
Hmm.
very, very curious phenomenon.
Yeah.
So I identify that dream with the Montana context in that, and it's also attributable to the universality of the motifs.
Hmm.
And in all these contexts, if you look at Fatima, for example, and um, if you look at Lucia and Jacinta and Francisco, I mean, they were very innocent, and when the first angel appeared, Jacinta's only 6. They became saints afterwards. But I mean, they're as innocent as you come. But yet, on their own terms, through this process, they become absolutely convinced of the reality of the supernatural force. I mean, when you read the stories, I mean, they're utterly compelling. And there's also a funny aspect when you read about, because there's an asymmetry in a lot of these apparitions, that
Hmm.
they hear different things. They don't. There's usually one person that receives more, and then like Francisco, couldn't hear all the things. So he could see the lips moving of the Virgin Mary, but he couldn't understand. And then he said, well, what is she saying to, so there's different levels of, and that seems to depend on the in qualities in the receiver.
Right.
Because this is another aspect in spiritual terms about reception, that in all the traditions, in Kabbalah, it means reception. That we think of, if you think of evolution as an atomistic thing, getting more and more complex, building up, the spiritual tradition says we come down, we descend.
Hmm.
So the bit physiologically that opens up, in many senses, is receiving. It's making itself. It's receptive. It's a reflexive relationship, which is ignored in physical atomistic descriptions of the theory of evolution, and in particular in spiritual terms, because in all the spiritual tradition there is a descent in some way, the Gnostic traditions and then various Platonic ideas and all that. So that's not accounted for in any theory of evolution. The idea, for example, that something might become like a flower in some sense and have an efflorescence to be receptive.
Mm.
Um, so uh, yeah, so what I'm saying, what I say out of this is that these, whether you see it in a Jungian sense and say, well, these are real in a psychic sense, or you believe, like I do, it doesn't mean that everything that people sees or you see are real in that sense. But the evidence is overwhelming about the ontological existence of, for me, for my terms, after looking at them. And these figures are active figures that are intervening. This is the mystical tradition. There's an intervention. So you have a, a stalagmite grown up from the ground, and there's also a stalactite, if you like, in spirit, that link in a pillar. It's not just going up from. It's not just building yourself the bootstraps and the atomistic building. It's not that. It's moving towards, and in many sense, it's a recurrence, a return to the origins.
Mm.
So if you look at that, even in the Montana example, whether you accept the stories of those apparitions as real or not, or look at the the idea of it, look at the parapsychological literature, even if you uh, don't believe in spiritual terms, or look at even practical examples like the building the statue, you see that there's a different force in operation, a different modality, a different way of seeing the world that draws on this, as Martin Novak talks, the community aspect of evolution, the idea of interconnection, the idea that underpinned the positive anarchical approach of Kropotkin or Jacques Ellul, a Christian anarchist who was a great critic of technology. And it says that we didn't evolve without this cooperation. And even concepts, the alpha male, all that kind of stuff, they're now seen to be scientifically wrong in relation to their description of historical uh, uh, evolution and
Mhm.
sociological evolution. So instead, we have a more interdependent connect. It doesn't take away those strong figures because there are archetypal figures, father, mother, child. You can't get away from that. You can't get away from that. And the destruction of the mother figure is following on from the very successful destruction of the father icon, which has been taken out, which
Right.
has really been taken out. It has really been blurred, erased deliberately on a spiritual way and sociologically with disastrous consequences, as books like um, the Search for the Father's Sibling Society, all those things that describe what's going on now because of that. But this the Virgin Mary figure is different because the Virgin Mary figure, and Jung was indicating this as well, is indicating a way forward, is indicating an approach forward, is indicating an oppositional perspective to this mechanistic, sadistic, cruel, all-knowing, mechanistic, transactional, materialistic, uh, lacking in compassion system.
Mm.
syndicating the contract. And it's suggesting that it triumphs in the end. In the Fatima context, it triumphs. In Russia, even, it triumphs. Although it's warning that our own conduct is creating a situation of it's often described in terms of a punishment, but I don't think that's the correct word. I think it's describing the consequence of our own actions.
Mm.
And when you have an environmental movement that hates nature, that hates wildness, that hates the things that exist there, that wants to solve the problem by erecting windmills, machines to kill animals in order to, which is really a camouflage for covering of increasing electricity for to feed their new machines. When there's no love of nature in these things, when there's a consistent effort by the pseudo-green movement to create a technocratic society that will be to the advantage of billionaires and technocrats, has nothing got to do with nature, has nothing got to do with lived existence, lived cooperation, families living on the land. It's absolutely intended to destroy that. Well, there's a deeper appeal to, well, again, she's also representative of the family, the Holy Family, which is one of the things that they want to destroy.
Yeah.
She's often the patron saint of nations, of Poland, for example. She was made the Queen of Poland, I think, and that was important. The cardinal that was very important in leading the Polish people in the resistance to the Soviet Union, Cardinal Wyszynski, did so on the basis of a total commitment to the Virgin Mary, and that was followed by John Paul II, and he was a critical figure in actually changing or contributing towards the downfall of the Soviet Union. So these are not superstitious individuals that are prone to light. He of course attributes. Here's another little connection,
Mhm.
and then I'll give it over to you. But a little interesting connection. John Paul II, they attempted to assassinate him in Rome, in St. Peter's Square. Remember the Turkish assassin?
Mhm.
And he survived it. There's various stories about why he survived it. It's difficult to verify the exact, I mean, but the bullet missed all the vital organs. Because it was on a anniversary of the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima, he attributed it towards Our Lady of Fatima. There was also a suggestion, I don't know if it's true, that a girl had held up a picture of Our Lady of Fatima and he bent down to it, and that said, I don't know if that's verifiable. I did read that, but anyway, he definitely attributes it to Our Lady of Fatima. He
Mhm.
goes to Fatima, recovered the next year, on the day before the anniversary on May 13th, which is also the anniversary of one of the apparitions, or the first one. A priest tries to kill him with a knife. People forget about this, and he did some damage to him. He did penetrate the thing, but I was stopped. So that was the day before another assassination attempt
Mhm.
on another failed one. The priest was a traditional priest who had mental problems, but also interestingly trained in Switzerland, which I found another interesting connection. Um, so uh, the assassination of Trump was also on the anniversary of one of the apparitions.
Oh wow,
Of
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, and it was also I also mentioned another talk I was doing that it was I'd been to Czestochowa, which is a famous Black Madonna, which was very crucial for Poland, very crucial for John Paul II. And in the image, these images have had roles in history. Um, there's two red lines where it was when it was stolen once and attacked, and blood came out of the according to the people, and they stopped it. But there's two lines, And well, after being to Czestochowa, I've seen the picture of Trump with the lions. It was a curious, coincidental kind of the way the wheel of history turns in symbolic ways. But the history of Europe is intrinsically dependent on the Virgin Mary, and its fall will be associated with the decline and its possible recovery. There are prophecies of this from the 19th century that uh, Europe will be taken over by Islam and by Russia, and then there will be a resistance to it, and associated with it. It's interesting things which seem to bear out. But funny enough, the Virgin Mary is also revered still, and not in the same way, in Islam. And Fatima, of course, is an important personage in Islam. So there's an implication of a unifying force of the Virgin Mary, and she did appear in Zaytun in Egypt, which it's been filmed, in fact. Um, uh, so we do have this possibility of a unifying figure, a transcendent figure, which has ontological reality. It's not a fabrication. It's not a. It cannot be dismissed. If one looks at the evidence in science, of course, there's all kinds of. They're always trying to explain away. Instead of explain, they're trying to explain away. But it's a phenomenal amount of evidence, and I don't have any problem personally saying that looking at all the evidence, accepting that certain things are always fraudulent, that people say they saw things, or some of the apparitions, there's ones that one would be doubtful of, and there's reasons why they were presented. But apart from that, the the evidence and also the effects of certain apparitions are just too difficult to dismiss. So that was the Montana connection. That was
I love it. I
yeah.
love it. Well, and it's interesting, and I agree with you. You speaking on this just kind of makes me think about, I think, the spiritual hierarchies that exist in a sense,
Mm,
where you have the different types of beings that are transcendental, and you have the certainly the lower astral realms, and Steiner talks about a lot about those and some of the entities that exist there, but there's like a spiritual hierarchy and dimension to it where a figure like the Virgin Mary is a very real anthological figure who can make her presence known in a physical sense, as we're seeing in these yeah in different cases like you outlined. But it's interesting, in the town I'm in now, we actually have and I hadn't made this connection per se to the Virgin Mary, but we do have a a huge statue that overlooks the town. They call it the Lady Dignity statue. The name is Dignity, and it's a native. It's a tribute to the native culture and the recognition of the Divine Mother and in the beliefs that they hold on that within the culture, and through the Lakota in particular who lived here. But Lady Dignity overlooks the whole town. It's like kind of the centerpiece, and I view it very much as like a Lady Dignity is watching over the town and watching over the land, because the land itself that we're living on was held very sacred. It's right on the Missouri River, which was a life force for a lot of the cultures that lived around it. And so, we have Lady Dignity up there, and it is kind of that divine mother figure for the community that I'm in now, right? So,
mm,
and
mm,
it's kind of an ever-present phenomenon and motherly figure in an archetypal sense, but I think on a deeper transcendental level too, that energy is present with where I'm living. I can, very much feel that just by going and observing the statue, because you go right up next to it, it towers over you. I mean, it's probably has to be at least 50 or 60 feet tall, sitting right on top of a hill. So anywhere in town, you're just driving by on the highway, you're going to still see it. Um, but so that
yeah.
archetype, that figure, I mean, it plays out here too, and it's found in the native traditions. It's found in traditions all across the world, And I think it's something that does represent a unification that's not built on, because I think what we alluded to earlier, there's maybe not in this podcast. I know we've talked about it, this idea of oneness being hijacked to more of a
Mm.
conforming ideal and to, oh, we want unity, but under the guise of conformity to our system, to the technocracy, to, capturing that interconnectedness through the web, like we were talking about, right? But I think the Virgin Mary ideal and, this Divine Mother, it's a unification that's still representing individual difference in individual culture and individual expression, and it's representing the transcendental in a way that uh, you can't capture within a system and turn into a commodity and turn into a transaction, because the relationships that we have with that divine mother figure, it's not transactional. It defies a lot of the ways that we've taught to um, socialize with one another within the confines of the system, right?
Mm.
It can't. It's not transactional in at all. So, um, to me, that it does bring like a pillar of hope in a sense, and at least having that, even just having that in the community in a way, it's kind of a securing feeling. I don't know what it is exactly about it, but if
Mm.
they were, let's say they were planning on taking it down or whatever, I'm sure the whole community would be up in arms to say, oh no, you're not taking down dignity. It's a pillar of the community. you know it you could say it's just a statue, but is it just a statue? It represents something much deeper in that, and bringing it.
Yeah, and
Bring,
there's an interesting context about that. They will take down and destroy, and they are destroying, closing down, selling off churches all over the place.
Mhm.
But the cathedrals and that are hard to get rid of because they were built with so many people, with so much reverence, with so much good materials. Although they're doing it by stopping access to them
Mhm.
and making it more difficult for believers to go into them, which is a massive shame, and it's a part of that new world order thing by turning it into a commodity. So you can go in as a tourist, but it's more difficult for believers to, as they could a few years ago. Now people are telling me, "Oh, it used to be. It wasn't like that. It's been changed in a number of countries where they're making it much more difficult." But still, there's something in the construct itself that really is difficult to destroy, even when they do it. Like Notre Dame, you could point to, because
Mhm.
the strength and Chartres is an important focal point, if you like, for traditional Catholics still haven't survived the war and all that kind of stuff, and the beauty of it. And all of these esoteric things are in there. They're in the stone. They're observable. They're things that were taken by other secret orders. They were in the life of the complexity of the church at one time. But another connection is I said a few years ago in an interview is that the the fascination with the lower astral domain,
Mhm.
the desire for sensation, the desire for immediacy of spiritual sensation, the attachment to the sensation and the attachment to shortcuts and the attachment to the dark side means that the demonic realm is more mundane now. So, and that there would, people don't believe in demons. They may see them, and they may become more visible to them. So, they won't be under any illusions about what they're identifying with, that this is not just a superstitious fantasy. And it's interesting that more of that is coming out. And to give an example from the United States, Tucker Carlson recently, I don't know if you saw that,
Yeah.
explained about when it had been attacked by a demon. And this is becoming more common uh, because it's real. They're talking about lower force and forces that people are inviting you. There's a lot of young people engaging in experiments, which I wouldn't recommend. And although I'm explaining mysticism and explaining the reality of it, they shouldn't. I wouldn't recommend anyone to be engaging in these processes because it's the same process, technological possession. You're giving up your autonomy. You're opening yourself up to things you don't understand, and uh, they're not to be trifled with. But in that context, the two traditional ones that have power, well, as well as Jesus, Saint Michael, the Virgin Mary is another powerful anti-demonic force. So actually, and there's another psychiatrist who talks about Psalm 23 and certain things that act to oppose the demonic realm, but the Virgin Mary, and again, so the invocation, the genuine invocation of these figures also acts to dispel and repel these. I know a lot of people don't believe in these things, but that's a long held belief and a long held that people would attest to. So these figures are not merely hypothetical. And then when if people do have or harassment by those things, and they react to them and something works, they then begin to see that this is a real thing, that this is a real phenomenon. It's ontologically real. And if you look at the stories about Jesus, his power over demons is one of the defining characteristics. So both the attempt to imprison human consciousness and spiritual consciousness and the demonic realm is related as in the context of, we're ruled not by flesh and blood, but by principalities, which include the corporate things, but also the idea, as Steiner would attest to, of a different realm and a war that's going on, as he articulated in terms of Michael and the scientific system. Not science itself, but that apparatus of control. So the Virgin Mary is important in that sense, on that big macro level and on the micro level in relation to protection of people. And so that's one of the realities of that in spiritual. I know a lot of people that don't believe in any of those things, but that's the reality of people. If people see those things as real. And again, you say about your background and all that. It's important as well, if we can, to inform ourselves by the roots that we're familiar with, because there will be vestiges of those things that are retained. And most of the cultures, if you talk or if you listen to, say, traditional Buddhists or whatever, they say, well, learn about your own, you must look at the spiritual tradition in your own culture. Because they don't also, there's one thing that a number of these spiritual traditions don't like, is they don't like wannabes. And the indigenous people say that a lot. We don't like people who come here and want to be us. They're not us. It doesn't mean that you can't. And they as well want to meet people that are informing them from their own tradition. Whereas the movement in Europe, the modern movement, the word modern has the word mother, M-O-D-E-R, this Scandinavian version of inna as well. The modern movement wants to destroy that, throw out everything in the past was bad. All those traditions are nonsense. They held us back and they misrepresent it. Everything was horrific, horrible, miserable. Most of the art in the last, about Ireland, it always misrepresents, presents, accentuates negative aspects. There was never anything nice about it. It was very, very seldom you see that. They caricature it. They present what were stereotypes. For example, I haven't seen some of the films but I saw clips, Banshees of blah de blah, whatever it is, and you have this stereotypical. The stereotypes in that were what were being presented when I was in London in the 1980s as racial stereotypes that the left were against. Of Irish as pathologically violent. In the context of having been persecuted for 800 years, they're presenting the Irish as the pathologically violent ones. This was in the newspapers. I was seeing that. Now they're in film and they're presented to the people as comical. I think it's as part of the dissolution of the cultural thing to denigrate and to misrepresent. And here's another example. I'm hearing as well, and I hear this from modern pagans, which, and I don't have any problem with anyone's, but when they begin to misrepresent things, so they say all this stuff about the Virgin Mary and the rosary and paying the rosary, they always present it as something pathetic done by quivering people, if you like, as Yeats said, to add the prayer to shivering prayer, the image of frightened people. Um, One of my father's uncles, when I was reading his memoirs about when he was arrested in 1916 during the revolution, and they're being marched off to, first they're marched off to a jail, if you like, as a barracks before they're sent off to England. In the barracks, it's Friday, and they give them the food, but they don't, because they're Catholics, they don't eat the meat on the Friday, and they said we're not eating the meat. Um, so I mean, they weren't letting go, and then they're transported on the bottom in a cattle boat, you know, in the places where the cows are going over to England. So so they were revolutionaries that would shoot you, you know, because there was a war of independence going on. So they were in a military organization fighting against the colonial force. So they were tough people, and he was in prison for, I don't know, 10 times, whatever, and a number of them. He escaped from prison in a tunnel, and they were involved in things, and they were active long after the thing was gone, and they opposed the treaty. And so they were very kind of hard line. But when he's going over to England on a boat, he's describing in the darkness, in the cattle ship, with the other people arrested, including some of the people, or one of the guys at least, that went on to negotiate with Churchill and all that, and Birkenhead and other futurists.
Mm.
but so, but they're saying the rosary. So the idea that that's been perpetuated of the weakness of things like prayer to divine beings, because of that, is wrong, and it's it's uh, it's doing something that can be nasty by in its misrepresentation.
Mm.
So I'm saying that it's a deliberate thing. So people don't know about things, they should shut up. In fact, the the Virgin Mary is often associated with military victory,
Mm.
strangely enough. So it's just this constant misrepresentation. And also, that chap and that particular uncle, and other ones was involved in it as well, he wrote as well about the goddesses in Ireland. They didn't have any problem with the ancient goddesses of Ireland. They weren't above that. They were part of the cultural thing, but the Virgin Mary was the epitome. But there was goddesses of the land that they never relinquished. They never let go of. There's no inconsistency.
Mm.
So the people that never fought for anything, that never had any truck with any of those sacred things, are often now representing themselves as some great lovers of this tradition. It's curious inversion,
Mm.
and I think that it's time to present the the kind of reality a bit more, and that's why I've become a little bit more vociferous about explaining those traditions as they're being steamrolled by these forces with the assistance and acquiescence of various cults that are materialistic, pseudo spiritual, and misinformed. You know, so there's a yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a deep, I'd say, inversion and manipulation, as you alluded to, that is taking place. It makes me want to go and dig into my Irish Catholic roots, to be honest with you, because
Mm.
I didn't have much connect. Had somewhat of a connection to it growing up, but just not something that was. Didn't grow up in a religious family. Didn't go to church. Didn't have, didn't really. I went to 1 week of Bible school, and I told my mom I didn't like it, and I was bored. So we didn't we didn't continue. But I was like 8, so it's not like I knew any better. I wanted to go home and play Nintendo at that point. So
Well, if you say you're doing that, if you say you're doing that, you'll immediately begin to get a whole lot of epithets as if you were guilty of all the abuses that they can find and attribute towards the Catholic Church. They will be on your shoulders. It's a curious phenomenon. It's the greatest and one of the greatest and oldest prejudices and biases against people. But it was ingrained in Irish history. Now there's also a curious. I mentioned about the Zionist thing. There's also a curious anti-Semitism that's been associated improperly, I believe, with Catholicism now, because people are selling this. Some people that present themselves as tradition are selling this thing, which I don't recognize.
mm,
There was no Jewish influence in Ireland. Uh,
right.
it wasn't a Jew, there was none of them contributing towards the oppression in Ireland for 100 years. I can guarantee you that. And in fact, when Daniel O'Connell, the great liberator, who led Catholic emancipation, he also was fighting for emancipation of Jews in Britain who were discriminated against. So these misrepresentations are part of the divide and conquer that are being played by people. So people who haven't read history are easily led into camps that are divisive and that besmirch the traditions without
Mm,
justification. But the automatic even curious things, Evan. For example, in relation to the abuse that has occurred in Ireland and elsewhere, uh, the it occurs in all institutions, but the abuse occurred in secular institutions as well,
mhm,
and everything has been confined to a religious perspective. There was massive abuse, and then the vast majority of abuse is against boys, but it's been turned. The impression you get is that it was all against women. It's really remarkable manipulation of the grand image of a thing,
mm,
uh, which, when you look at the detail from the historical evidence, it's a lot different and a lot more nuanced. And then you have to bear in mind that, like you see, for example, the presentation of mainstream media on certain issues in the United States, where you know that it's just nonsense presentation. Everyone can see through, not everyone, a lot of people can see through it. There's a similar process in relation to the history of religion and that, which is so that's why people have to inform themselves from good historical sources.
mm,
Uh, it's the same thing people tell me about the Qatars, and of course, there's some horrific examples from the Qatars. But when you look at the historical evidence, the historical and scholarship on the things, you come to slightly different views. That there wasn't a unified, there wasn't this unified view of Qatarism or a philosophical thing that's being presented. That's what the scholars say. It's difficult to identify that movement, and it's not the Catholic Church necessarily that's doing it. It's the princes that benefit, the princes in France that gain the land and have the benefit. So those princely snaking forms are still there. They
right.
they continued, but you say, well, it's these guys over here did all these things. We didn't have the centralized. I mean, it's another argument, but what I'm saying is there is nuance there.
Right.
It's not to deny, to reject things that have happened, but the nuance is lost, and that's a dangerous thing. And the nuance is lost because these are moves. These, in philosophical terms and postmodernism in particular, they talk about moves. This is a maneuver that we use. It's another word for a lie often. So unfortunately, there is a record, there is truth, there is something that's real. And in the long arc of history, as Martin Luther King says, that the truth and justice will prevail, because after a while, when you hear so many lies, people begin to tire with it. And I believe that there is a type of madness that's associated with that. If you spend your life lying all the time, it must come to a type of madness. And when you have a materialist thing, where everything is a repeated mosaic of misconstruction, misrepresentation, lies, and blurring of truth, it cannot for the individual be a good thing. There are reasons in the perennial philosophy why people seek to do the right thing, to speak right words, to be true, not to bear false witnesses against your neighbor. But in the other traditions associated with the promotion of materialism, left and right, they can lie at will. They're celebrated for lying. If they're successful in their lies, that's great. Fascism and communism, and people in the mainstream now. It's so there is a necessity to emphasize those perennial traditions, and there's a
Right.
practical relevance in it.
Right. Well, and I think discernment nowadays is more important than anything else, especially when you're going into looking at historical sources and looking at, that's why I try and go to as many primary sources as as
Yeah,
possible,
that's right.
read
Yeah,
directly from people who were there or who was telling the story and, from there make discernment, they kind of,
mm.
because everybody's going to have their own perspective and way that they see it. And you're right. A lot of what's pushed nowadays is more based in inversion and based in manipulation and leading people astray. And we're quick to want to point fingers and judge and paint labels upon people and groups. And so, and anytime I see that in general, it's usually a red flag for me. I'm not going to put the state of the world on the back of one group or one religion or one whatever it may be,
Yeah,
ideology.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
so nuanced and so there's so much complexity that I feel like that's just kind of a I don't know, kind of a way to put a band-aid on it without doing any real research. And you just kind of continue the cycle of painting a common enemy, and then what is that really going to do for you at the end of the day? So um but yeah, so James, we're approaching almost 4 hours. I mean, I feel like
Oh
that's a
my
good.
goodness. Yeah, you're a bad influence. Lead me astray.
Well, I was gonna say what I find amazing about these chats is even though they go that long in length, is they still do circle back to our central themes, and we go on tangents and find different areas of exploration, but they really hone in on the points that we're making here and the central ideas. So,
Well, yeah. I mean, I know that sometimes people can find it difficult, when you appear to be, or when I appear to meander, but I've laid out the continuity and
mhm,
the arguments in the work that I've done, and there is an interlink. This is the important point. That part of the control system has been a compartmentalization,
right,
and we've built up all these things, these towers, these blocks that are loose and they're not bound together. And it's only through the lateral links, the that we get the support of, or proper the warp and the weft together in a pattern. And things are connected that don't appear to be connected and that people don't want to be connected. For example, you cannot get away from the concept of God, even though you want to be, say, well, I'm an atheist and I'm an agnostic and your atheist friends are talking about God
hmm
and trying to sell new gods. These are things that are almost inescapable. It doesn't mean that you have to believe in God or that you have to think or whatever like that, but really, when you're engaged in the world in any way, that these things are going to confront you and you're going to encounter them in different ways, consciously or not. And what I'm suggesting is that if we begin to seek to find the harmony within the traditions, and recognize that they have more to offer, that they did offer more, they did give more, they have the potential to address these challenges, uh, then maybe we'll be able to qualify the irresistible force, the new flood of data that's going to inundate us, to control our lives, to possess our consciousness, to possess us, to possess our spirit. So we need to create the dam to to stop that, and that's true cooperation, and that may be the factor that helps us to evolve, to bring up to the next level, by having respect for difference, by having respect for nuance, by having an ability to distinguish between different circumstances, ability to distinguish between propaganda and truth, an ability to get out of sectarian basis, in our ability to have discussion, ability to have difference. This has been a terrible thing looking at America in recent years, because I don't think it was like that as I followed in relation to this automatic separation. You're this or you're that. This is a deliberate process. When I heard, for example, the difference between the Democrats I used to listen to when I was young and the Democrats now is a world apart. There is little relationship between them, for example. And then if you don't agree, you're automatically, and that applies in both cases. But I mean, I do see differences. It applies on the other side as well, where you don't subscribe to certain things, and so the big middle ground in between those things is lost, and that's where most people are. But you cannot escape this bifurcation on the thing, and it's not healthy. Um, so again, it's and then even then, if one thinks one has found a solution, really there's this other game going on above that. That's the one I'm concerned about. The game to control your soul and to control your nervous system through an electronic nervous system of the world. And this is the big game. And what I say is focus on that big thing. Put your differences aside. Bear in mind that you're probably being manipulated, whatever side you're on, that the solution, the pendulum will swing and use your group as appropriate. You think you're winning, but you're not necessarily winning. It depends on what the criteria are, depends on what their objectives are. You don't know what the game is, you cannot assess where you are in the game. Focus on those big things and try and suspend minor differences, try and accommodate differences that people do have that are genuine, and try and not jump down each other's throats in relation to differences, and try and be aware in particular when other groups are being stereotyped, or their name is being besmirched without evidence. I mean, that's an important thing. So I hate all these generalizations. They don't, when one is generalizing groups, it's usually a wrong argument if one says the fill in the gap are doing this. And even in relation to the discussion about trans issues and all that, there's also a core of people that right at the center whose lived experience is not defined, who understand, who's not defined by any of the politicization on left or right, who seek to use them. So I mean, we have to have some respect for the individual behind all these things, and in the process as we're moving forward. So yeah, but in summary, there's the AI-Govnerveance is my attempt to explain how care has been appropriated. We're going to be possessed through this AI spectrum. We've also called it cyber nanocracy, and a whole range of new names. Spectrum with a K to indicate the diffuse, sensorized environment we're going to live in, which will come right into your body, where you have no independence, your privacy is gone, your thoughts are gone, and you can be informed, controlled by electromagnetic pulses and other pulses outside. The technology is there. There's loads of patents to attest to. And we use the example of which I do think is the opposing force for me, of spiritual traditions, like the Virgin Mary, who is ontologically real for me. I don't care whether people believe that or not. And I'd say, look at the evidence. Go and look at the evidence about Fatima, for example. Because a lot of people say, oh, no, I don't believe I need evidence. They don't look at the evidence. Go and read the evidence of Fatima from people who are hostile to it,
Mm-hmm.
and and tell me that there's nothing there, there's nothing to see here. Even if you come to the conclusion that you think it was definitely a UFO, that's fine, but I wouldn't be persuaded by that. But it's look at the evidence, look at and then for people that do believe in these things, they also have to have that innocence that you talked about in relation to the reality of the higher order. Don't identify with the little demons that are trying to attract you around the little elves that say, "Come live with me," is what they're probably saying, or the false angels of light, as is often said, because there's all kinds of demonic forces that manifest in that way, and you can only protect yourself against that by identifying with a tradition that has a an ontological reality and a coherent doctrine that that's policed and contextualized in some way that gives some guarantee, if you like, as well, a corroboration, lest we retreat into an idiosyncratic sense of whatever crosses our psyche without any ontological reality that is, that we cannot transmit to anybody else.
Right. I definitely agree with you. And I look forward to reading the next book because I mean, I'm sure it'll even outline even further in depth with the 4 hours we went. There's whole other levels to it, right? So just to
No,
keep
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I can only give an indication of some of the things. The detail would take a few weeks to
right.
talk. Yeah,
Well, I'm sure we could do that if we set our minds
yeah,
to it, but
yeah.
that in itself,
But
that's probably more like a whole create like a whole series or something, break it up into 10
yeah,
parts. But
or they
is
can
it
have a look at the book. Yeah,
yeah, right. No, exactly. That might be
yeah.
the easier option. Is the book available now or is it
Yes, on Amazon. Yeah, I have it up on Amazon. So
sweet? All right, and I'll put it in the episode show notes so
yeah,
everybody can just
yeah.
scroll on down and get yourself a copy. And James, I want to thank you again for coming on. I always enjoy these conversations. They've really informed my own exploration and view and relationship with technology and really have been foundational for a lot of the areas I'm exploring now. So, it's always a
That's great. I
pleasure.
was glad to see you doing some stuff about AI, and that. I think the greater again community effort begins to corroborate and reinforce and make people aware and different voices and different perspectives and the parallax can contribute. So good luck with your spiritual work and your work in that context because they're both fundamentally related. That was the
Right.
premise of all my work about the need for spiritual evolution and the need to balance the technological materialistic challenge, and they're inherently related. So it's good to see that in your work too. So good luck with that, and thanks
Mm.
again for the time and the conversation. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, they really do go hand in hand. So I want to thank all the listeners who made it through the 4 hours. And I know there's a few of them because I always get feedback on these conversations, James, about
Yeah,
I think people in your they love the 3 4 hour marathon podcasts and I
yeah,
enjoy doing them
yeah.
too. So thank you
Yeah, thank
everybody.
you to them as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for tuning in and we will see you all on the next episode. Special thank you to James for coming on the Fifth Dimension. Always a pleasure to be able to chat with him. I think the episodes him and I do are probably my favorite ones, and I always make it a point to prioritize a conversation when we're scheduled for it. So it really becomes the day revolves around it. So thank you to James for coming on. Highly encourage you guys to purchase his new book, AI-Govnerveance, Care and Possession in Dustopia. I can't wait to read it myself, as it's really just going to dive deeper into what we talked about here today. And head on over to his website. The link to do that is in the episode show notes as well, because he's got a lot of great interviews, not with just myself, but others, including Jeffrey Mishlove. And there's probably a few others, Paul Check, that you would recognize as well. So definitely encourage you guys to check out his full body of work. And then he's got more than one book. He's got plenty of books. I got one on my bookshelf behind me. I pull it out, but Luna's making her presence felt here and can't really move. So, but be sure to purchase his book, And I thank you guys for tuning in. Head on over to my Substack, mcdermott.substack.com. Subscribe there. You can subscribe whatever platform you're on, like, subscribe, share, whatever you feel like doing. Give us 5 stars on one of the audio platforms. It does help more people find the show and those algorithms that we have so talked about on this podcast. And you can book a tarot reading with me one-on-one. Link to do so is in the episode show notes below as well. And special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires here in South Dakota. It's going to wrap up this episode. Be sure to subscribe. More great podcasts coming your way in the very near future. And I'll see you next time.